the fashion of the future.
But there's no need to be overwhelmed.
Island made up of solar panels. Wow, we're walking on water.
This is what it feels like to be on the moon.
Just consult the experts.
This is how you really do it.
Take a look at tomorrow's tech today with Click. Tomorrow at 12:30 on the BBC News Channel.
You're watching BBC News at 9 with me, Ben Brown, here in Downing Street, where the Prime Minister is expected to make an announcement this morning about her future. Our latest headlines. Heading for a Brexit exit, speculation grows that Theresa May will announce a date for her resignation today after a backlash by her own MPs against her latest Brexit plan. It's thought that in the next few minutes she'll be meeting the head of the party's backbench MPs to discuss her exit plans. The 10th of June is widely expected to be the start of the leadership contest within the Conservative Party. Boris Johnson, Esther McVeigh and Rory Stewart have already announced that they will definitely run, but senior Conservatives are insisting that anything could happen.
All kinds of things could happen. The favourite doesn't usually win, that is, the person expected to win hasn't won one of these for a very long time.
A 10th of June timetable would mean that Theresa May will still be Prime Minister for President Donald Trump's state visit in early June. Yesterday, the Foreign Secretary insisted Mrs May would be the one to welcome the US President.
I'm Annita McVeigh with today's other main stories. US officials file 17 new charges against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange as he continues to fight extradition. A sharp rise in cases of mumps as doctors urge people to make sure they're vaccinated.
Hello, very good morning to you from Downing Street. Theresa May could be about to reveal a timetable for her departure from Downing Street. After almost 3 years as Prime Minister, she is meeting the head of the party's backbench MPs just about now, Sir Graham Brady, to discuss her plans. Although we haven't actually seen Sir Graham yet, we are expecting him in the next few minutes here to see the Prime Minister. Now, it's expected that the contest to find a new Conservative leader could begin in a fortnight's time. The pressure is on the Prime Minister, and that has been intensifying amid anger about her latest Brexit plans. So, what happens next? Well, as we've said, Theresa May is currently, or certainly in the next few minutes, meeting Sir Graham Brady, chair of the 1922 Committee of Backbench MPs, to discuss her future and a timetable for her departure. Now, the Prime Minister, after that meeting with Sir Graham, could then give a statement here in Downing Street announcing her departure timetable. If she does resign, then she probably won't step down straight away. She will still host President Trump during his state visit to the UK in early June. So that would mean that the 10th of June would mark the start of a Conservative Party leadership contest to select her successor. And that, in turn, would mean that July could be the earliest that we would see a new Prime Minister in number 10. So that is what we're expecting to see. Let's get the latest from our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, who's with me now here in Downing Street. Norma, we think she's going to be meeting Sir Graham in the next few minutes. If you were a fly on the wall, what would you expect to be seeing and hearing at that meeting?
Well, I don't think it'll be a great confrontation, to be honest. Sir Graham Brady's a sort of gentleman Tory. I think he will want to hear what Mrs May intends to do rather than, as it were, putting a gun to her head and saying you've got to go. So I think it'll be left to her to take the initiative. But everything we've sort of seen and heard over the past 48 hours suggests she has now reached the conclusion that really she can't go on, because the political reality is her Brexit bill is dead. It's not going to get through Parliament, and if her bill can't get through Parliament, her fate is tied to that. There's really no point in carrying on as Prime Minister. Now, I don't think that is something she will have sort of decided easily, or a conclusion she will have reached lightly. She clearly, I think, well, yesterday there were clear signs she wanted to fight on. She was determined to try and press ahead. But, you know, the reality just seems to me overwhelmingly. We saw the backlash from party members, MPs on all sides, not just the Brexiteers, some of her supporters saying, look, this is just not going to fly. And then yesterday we saw Jeremy Hunt, Sajid Javid, two sort of pivotal figures in the middle ground of the cabinet. Yes, both leadership contenders, but saying to her, look, you really can't expect to get this through. And now the meeting with Sir Graham, and he comes armed with a vote from the 1922 executive, which in effect means he can say to her, look, unless you go, you set a date for your departure, we will trigger an immediate no confidence vote. So in effect, go of your own volition, do not force us to drag you out kicking and screaming, and I think that is the conclusion she has reached.
So meeting Sir Graham today, meeting Sajid Javid, Jeremy Hunt yesterday, some people will say this is the equivalent of the men in grey suits who sort of put paid to Mrs Thatcher's premiership.
It tends to go this way. If you can't command the confidence of the most senior people around you, it's pretty much impossible to operate as a Prime Minister. And this tends to be what happens in the party. It doesn't actually come to a full-blooded leadership contest. Prime Ministers are advised by those around them that there's no point in going on. And although, you know, you could argue Mrs May has toughed out so much, and she really has. I mean, you know, we saw her, David Davis, her first Brexit secretary, walk out, then Boris Johnson, then Dominic Raab, then Andrea Leadsom, again and again losing more and more people. And she's just hung on in there. I mean, an extraordinarily resilient politician. You know, some might say bloody-minded, but, you know, very, very determined to press on, seemingly against all the odds. So you could say, well, you know, she's lost Andrea Leadsom, so what? She can hunker down. I think there has been just a mood change in the party now, which all goes back to that deal she put together to try and get Labour on board. And for many Tory MPs, the bridge they were just not prepared to cross was this idea of opening the way to another referendum. And although Mrs May has insisted she's not backing another referendum, she's simply saying to MPs, if you want to vote on this, I will enable it. I think symbolically many Tory MPs took that as sort of a step too far to even talk about that as an option.
So was that her big political mistake? I mean, could she, if she hadn't done that, was there any way she could have then survived?
I actually think any compromise she offered now would have either enraged her own party or wouldn't have been enough to get Labour on board. I think we've passed the point of compromise. If this deal had been put on the table a year or so ago, I think it probably would have got quite a healthy majority, because there are concessions in there which do appeal to Labour MPs on workers' rights, on the environment, on a temporary customs union up to the next election. If Mr Corbyn wins it, you could have gone for a full customs union, and yes, the option of having a vote on another referendum. Now, those are all, you know, a significant movement on Mrs May's part. I think the difficulty was she started out as Prime Minister tacking very hard to the Brexiteers to try and park the idea that she was a Remainer, and she hemmed herself in with all sorts of red lines, which in the end she wasn't able to pull back from. I think that was, you know, one fundamental mistake, and the second one obviously was the general election, which cut away the prospect of any Tory majority to just try and push a deal through on Tory party lines. The third difficulty, I think, is one she has as a politician, in that she is a Tory through and through, and by that I mean she's never been a sort of collegiate, gregarious politician who can reach out to others. It was always going to be very difficult for her, I think, to broker a broader Brexit compromise. And so we ended up in the position where she left it too late to reach out, and she'd already lost her party in the process because of those red lines she herself had put down. So in that sense, you know, she was the master of her own misfortune, I think, by the way she handled the whole Brexit process.
And I suppose she'll go down in history, if she does go imminently, as a Brexit Prime Minister who couldn't get Brexit through.
The question is whether anyone could have done any better. I mean, it is such a gargantuan, complex political issue. You need the political skills of, I don't know, you'd have to be a political Houdini to get out of this one. It is a massive undertaking. And I think what has made it harder is, whereas Europe has traditionally been the issue which has devoured Tory leaders, it has divided the Tory party for the best part of 50 years. What has happened now, it is spilt over into the body politic and spread out into the country. And we are now, let's be honest, a very, very divided country. We have European elections, but, you know, let's be honest, this wasn't about the merits of different candidates. Bluntly, it was mostly about whether you remain or leave. Still, faced with that, you would have to be an extraordinary political leader to manage a way through this, and then perhaps even more importantly, to find a way to bring this country together again. And, you know, from where I'm sitting, I think that may be a task which stretches well beyond the next leader and the next parliament. You're probably looking at a generational issue now for whoever takes over. Such is the scale of the task.
Let's talk about that now. We can hear from the former Conservative Chancellor, Kenneth Clarke, great Remainer, of course, great pro-European, who's been speaking on Radio 4's Today programme.
We are going to have a chaotic 6 weeks now as a diversion, a possibly harmful diversion from the deadlock on the European Union that we've had. And all kinds of things could happen. The favourite doesn't usually win, that is, the person expected to win hasn't won one of these for a very long time, as far as I can recall. We've got to make sure the whole thing is conducted in an atmosphere which doesn't add to the air of tragic farce which has already been surrounding the party and the European issue for, well, the last 12 months. The European Research Group, the right wing of my party, have finally got their woman. They've been trying to get rid of her for the last 2 or 3 months. They seem to imagine the party will now unite behind the one of them that most resembles Nigel Farage. I don't think it's going to be like that. I hope. I'm sure I expect, but my earnest naive hope is we might concentrate on what exactly the answer of the new Prime Minister is going to be to all the problems, European problems, that defeated Theresa May.
That was Ken Clarke. Just getting some news that Helen Grant MP, Vice Chair for Communities, has resigned. It's with regret that I have today resigned as Vice Chair for Communities. She says now is the time for new leadership to deliver Brexit and unite our party and our country. Let's go back to Norman Smith, our assistant political editor. Well, there we are, another day, another resignation.
Yeah, slightly confusing. It seems to me slightly by the point, given we're going to have tumultuous change for people to be, abandoning ship now. But I guess the bottom line, Helen Grant, a vice chair of the party, she's in Anne Widdecombe's old seat. I mean, we have to talk to her. I'm not quite sure what political point she's trying to make, because Mrs May is now going. This isn't going to influence anything unless she now wants a freer hand to, I don't know, articulate the case for some particular candidate in the leadership contest, and we may see a bit more of that. But I can't honestly say it seems to me to be a game changer or anything like that. I mean, the significant thing really is that yesterday it was only Andrea Leadsom who had gone. There was a moment, I think, when there would have to be a concern in Downing Street that, other Brexiteers. Chris Grayling apparently was very unhappy with the Brexit deal at Cabinet the other day. I know Liam Fox was also unhappy about the idea Mrs May had mooted of going to so-called indicative votes. There are plenty of Brexiteers who are unhappy. And, in a funny sort of way, it's striking that they have hung on in there, which probably will rebound against them in any future leadership contest, because when you talk to sort of the Brexiteer backbenchers, it seems to me one of their bottom lines is they keen on anyone who hung on in cabinet, because they think that suggests people are too willing to go along with the sort of accommodations of Mrs May. So what follows from that is we are probably looking at a Brexiteer replacement for Mrs May, and quite probably a Brexiteer from out with the cabinet, because all those who stuck in, their sort of hands are tainted in the blood. But a lot of them did hang on in.
Norman, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Well, it's a beautiful sunny day here in Downing Street, but it could also be a day of history. We are expecting a statement from the Prime Minister outlining her departure from Downing Street. But we will bring you much more. For the moment, we're going to say goodbye now to viewers on BBC Two. And welcome to viewers on BBC One. I am Ben Brown, live here in Downing Street, where Theresa May could be about to reveal a timetable for her departure after almost 3 years as Prime Minister. She's currently, we think, meeting the head of the party's backbench MPs to discuss her plans. And it is expected that the contest to find a new Conservative Party leader could begin in a fortnight's time. So what does happen next? Well, this morning, Theresa May meeting Sir Graham Brady. We haven't actually seen him here in Downing Street, but we are expecting a meeting around now. He is the chair of the 1922 Committee of Conservative Backbench MPs, and the two of them will be discussing her future and, it's thought, a timetable for her departure. Now, after that meeting, the Prime Minister could then give a statement here in Downing Street announcing her departure date. If she does resign, she probably won't step down straight away. She would still host President Trump during his state visit to the United Kingdom, which is in early June. The 10th of June could then mark the start of a Conservative Party leadership contest to select her successor. And that would mean that July could be the earliest that we would see a new Prime Minister at number 10. Well, let's discuss all of what could be happening here in Downing Street and what is happening right now with our assistant political editor, Norman Smith. So the first thing we're expecting is this meeting with Sir Graham Brady.
Yeah.
Now, he's a pivotal figure because he's the shop steward, essentially, of the Tory backbenches, and effectively, she has lost the support of the Conservative MPs in Parliament, or most of them, is that right?
She has. I mean, it's interesting, Sir Graham has actually come in for quite a bit of criticism from Tory MPs for not being forthright enough with Mrs May, for being too willing to allow things to go on, to accept meetings down the line. And there are a sort of fairly strong body of opinion in the Tory party who think he should have gone to Mrs May some time ago and said, game's up. He has chosen not to do that. I think it's partly a character issue. He's much more of an old school Tory. He doesn't want to force Mrs May out of the door. I think tactically too, he takes the view that forcing a contest, a no confidence vote rather, would be so bloody and brutal and divisive and ugly, it would rebound against the party. Better to let Mrs May reach her own conclusion that she could not go on. And I think that is, that will be the tone of the conversation.
Let's just clarify, because she doesn't actually have to go through another confidence vote until the end of the year, unless the 1922 committee changed the rules. And so just explain what they did on that.
So what happened, there was a move to oust Mrs May, as we know, in December. That failed, and under the party rules you can't have another crack at it for another year. So basically she was safe until December. However, given the sort of unfolding car crash of Mrs May's Brexit negotiations, there was clearly an appetite to oust Mrs May. And so what the 1922 executive were looking at were basically rewriting the rules or suspending the rules. Now, on Tuesday night, they had a vote to basically suspend the rules so they could trigger another no confidence vote. Those I've spoken on the executive say, look, it's pretty clear the majority was for suspending the rules so we can have another no confidence vote. So when Sir Graham goes in and talks to Mrs May, he does have in his pocket a letter with the result of that ballot. And if Mrs May were, and I don't think she would, say, you know what, I'm hanging on, he could just put it on the table and say, I don't think so, because if you do, we will force you out.
So that letter is effectively a gun to her head. Even if she wanted to stay, she can't.
No, she can't. They were pretty clear. I mean, next week is recess, so there wouldn't have been a confidence vote next week. But figures on the executive I've spoken to have suggested they would have triggered it as soon as Parliament came back, which is June the 4th. Now, picture the scene. Donald Trump arrives. How could you have a Prime Minister next to the American President knowing the back of Parliament, MPs were voting, and probably overwhelmingly, to get rid of you? I mean, it would have been so chaotic, so damaging to, the brand Great Britain. It's almost unthinkable. And I think Mrs. May will have known that, quite apart from the fact that just for her own sense of self-worth, she clearly wouldn't want to be forced out, clinging onto the door by her fingernails. This way, at least she can say, I did my best. I believe this is the best deal. This was our best opportunity to get it through. I haven't convinced the House of Commons. It is now up for someone else to try. And that is a coherent and respectable way to leave.
All right, Norman, back with you in just a moment. But let's just hear from the new Defence Secretary, Penny Mordaunt, prominent Leave campaigner, about what she's got to say about the political situation right now.
Morning.
Any messages for the Prime Minister this morning?
I'm going to be spending the day with the British Army and the RAF.
And will you be throwing your hat in the ring to replace the Minister?
Well, not much there from Penny Mordaunt, the new Defence Secretary, but the contest for the new party leader, if the timetable is as we expect, would begin officially in the middle of June, around the 10th of June, and go on, what, Norman, we think that contest for maybe up to 6 weeks, so we wouldn't actually have a new Prime Minister here in number 10 until maybe July.
I think that's right, and that is a fast timetable for the Tory party, but there's a clear desire to try and get this done and dusted before MPs go off for the summer recess, close of play July. So the way it would unfold, if June 10 is the date, there'd probably be then a 2-week period for hustings in Parliament, where all the candidates, you only need 2 nominations to stand, so the world and his wife can pretty much stand if you're a Tory MP, and it looks like they're going to. I counted this morning 15 potential runners. One of my colleagues got it to 17, so it's, a whole cavalcade of candidates. They will then be whittled down to just 2. So what happens is you have a series of successive exhaustive ballots where the bottom candidate in each case drops out. More realistically, candidates will know they've only got 3.5 supporters, so there's no point. So they'll know themselves that there's no point going for it. I guess you'll end up with maybe half a dozen or so, hacked back to 2. That then is put in a ballot of the party membership, and there have to be hustings in each of the 11 regions of the Tory party, and then they will have a postal ballot to choose the winner. So we would expect the winner to be in place, I suppose, beginning of August. Gives him the summer to get a new team in place to try and shape their pitch. Difficult because summer months are sleepy months, no one's paying attention here, but that would be the hope. But in the interim, you're right, Mrs. May would stand down as party leader on June 10, but she would remain coming in and out of number 10 as Prime Minister until the end of July.
I know you're going to be paying attention all summer, Norman, of course, but speaking of the runners and riders, let's just run through them for you, because as we were saying, the contest for a new Conservative leader is now really hotting up. It has been for weeks, really. Potential candidates have been setting out their ideas, their stalls. Let's just take a look now then at the main contenders as we think they will be. The former Foreign Secretary, of course, Boris Johnson's already confirmed that he will stand in the race. He said, of course I will. Esther McVeigh, Rory Stewart are other Tory MPs to have openly declared that they will stand. Mr Johnson has long been seen as the front runner amongst Brexit supporting grassroots Tory members, so if he does make it onto the final ballot of 2, he would expect to do very well in the party at large. He could face competition though, of course, from Dominic Raab, the former Brexit Secretary, who has not yet announced that he will run, but has appeared to set out policies for a future manifesto in an interview with the Sunday Times, including a cut to the basic rate of income tax. Now, he has said that he would not vote for Mrs May's new Brexit plan, saying, quote, I cannot support legislation that would be the vehicle for a second referendum or customs union. Jeremy Hunt, the Foreign Secretary, has not confirmed either that he would run for party leader, but like Dominic Raab, he has used a newspaper profile to introduce voters to his family. The Foreign Secretary seen as perhaps a more moderate Brexit candidate than Mr Johnson and Mr Raab. He campaigned, in fact, for Remain in the 2016 referendum and has since voted for the Prime Minister's Brexit deal. Then there's a possibility of Michael Gove could also be in the running. He gave an interview in which he said he had learned from his 2016 leadership attempt. He refused to say whether he would run in a new leadership contest, but his role as Environment Secretary has allowed him to perhaps rehabilitate his reputation after he ended Boris Johnson's candidacy 3 years ago by launching his own campaign. Some said he stabbed Boris Johnson in the back and in the front. David Mellor is former Conservative MP who served as a minister in John Major's cabinet. He's been speaking to BBC Breakfast a little earlier.
What I find ridiculous is this business that we have to deliver Brexit. That was what was always said by Theresa May, although she was delivering a very different animal called Brino, which is Brexit in name only, where most of the crucial elements of a proper Brexit had already been negotiated away. And until this whole business of that referendum, and that's why, by the way, whatever awful things people say about Theresa May, there's a person skulking in his personally created gypsy caravan writing his overpriced memoirs who's really responsible for this mess, and that's David Cameron. But the truth of the matter is, until this Brexit thing is dealt with, no Conservative leader will have an easy time, and the country won't have an easy time. And that is why, in truth, what now has to happen is that there has to be a second referendum, and the same question has to be asked again, because the evidence on which people voted 3 years ago has changed almost completely.
That was David Mellor with his thoughts. Let's go back to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith. Norman, we're just going through the runners and riders there. I mean, is it your expectation that Boris Johnson, who's already officially said he's going to run, that he would make it to that list of two that would then be put to the party at large in the country? Because we know that in the party around the UK, he is overwhelmingly popular.
I mean, I think the truth about Tory leadership contests is place no weight on expectation, because frankly, anything can happen, and usually does. On the face of it, you would say Boris Johnson, standout front runner. The polls suggested he's the party darling. If it goes to the grassroots, he's a shoo-in. However, you know, if you just trace previous Tory leadership contests, it never works out that way. I mean, you remember Michael Heseltine did in Mrs. Thatcher, the sort of glory boy of the Tory party, overtaken by the grey man, John Major. No one kind of predicted that. Ian Duncan Smith, not an obvious person to succeed, but he did. Even David Cameron, I mean, he was up against David Davis. David Cameron started as a nobody. Nobody had heard of him. But, you know, he managed to come from nowhere because he kind of took off his tie, took off his jacket and did the whole sort of casual, compassionate Conservative thing. And people thought, yeah, you know what, that's great. So he won. And even Theresa May only won because of the sort of, you know, Greek tragedy slaughterhouse that went on in the background between Boris Johnson, Michael Gove and her other candidates. Basically, no one else was left standing. They're all lying in a bloody pool on the stage. So again and again, it never goes according to plan. Boris Johnson, yes, he has his supporters in the country and he has many supporters in Parliament. Equally, there are many Tories who would pretty much die in a ditch to stop him. They don't trust him. They don't frankly think he's a Tory in some ways. They think he's a sort of Boris Johnson one-man fan club. So there are many Tories who will do whatever they can to try and stop him getting onto the final ballot. Now, it's extraordinarily difficult to do that because two names go through. My guess is one will be a Brexiteer and one will be a Remainer or former Remainer. If you're looking at the Brexiteer cast list, Dominic Raab, he simply doesn't have the profile and sort of the razzmatazz charisma that I think Tory MPs probably want. They want someone who puts them in with a shout of winning. Boris Johnson can at least point to the London mayoralty, an example of how he can win actually in a Labour city. So I'm not sure he does it. Penny Mordaunt is an interesting one because there's quite a lot of respect for her. She doesn't have a huge profile. But she's a woman. I think that creates another dynamic for the Tory party, particularly in the country, if you're looking for a non-Etonian candidate. So she could be another possible Brexiteer, and there are others. But, you know, I think you're looking at Boris Johnson slipping up. on him sort of stabbing himself in the front. I think that's what you have to look at. By saying something, by doing something, he sort of scuppers himself. And that's not impossible because, let's be honest, Boris Johnson's a bit of a wild card. Anything could happen. So as things stand, yes, he's the favourite, but things never go according to plan.
And we've been talking about the personalities. Let's just talk a bit about what all of this could mean for the country, because Theresa May, very much a Prime Minister trying to get a Brexit deal. Is the chance now of a no-deal Brexit heightened by the fact that she's probably, depending on what happens here today, not going to be in Downing Street for very much longer, and we may well get somebody like Boris Johnson taking over?
I think that is a likelihood now, yes. If it's impossible to reach any sort of compromise, and we've tried umpteen different ways of doing this in Parliament. We've had 3 goes at Mrs May's bill. We've had indicative votes twice. No one's been able to agree on anything. More than that, you'd have to have a comfortable majority to push through any proposal. So we are nowhere in Parliament. Parliament is stuck, deadlocked, and the maths will not change unless you have a general election. Would a new Tory leader want a general election? Well, not if the local elections and the European elections are any likely outcome. It's a pretty high wire strategy. So that leaves you with Parliament running up to the buffers of October 31st, the new European deadline. Now, if we do nothing, then we leave without a deal. So we are basically dependent on 2 things. Either MPs have to come up with some grand wheeze to somehow get round the possibility of no deal. They tried that before with sort of the Yvette Cooper, Nick Bowles manoeuvre. It didn't quite come off, but maybe if no deal was slap bang in front of people's faces, it would come off. Or we go cap in hand, bended knee, pleaser, to the EU. Could we please have a bit longer? Now, if you talk to folk in government, they are convinced that the EU has basically had it up to the back teeth with us. They're just fed up with us. They don't want to waste any more time faffing about with the British Parliament, unable to get a grip on things.
Especially President Macron, it seems.
Absolutely. And in a way, you can't blame them. They've got big issues to sort out themselves. They don't want to be dealing with, Brits banging on about Brexit the whole time. So I think the view, and it's not just Brexiteers, Remainers too, as that the EU could well say, look, I'm sorry guys, we've really given you plenty of time, we've come up with a deal, it's on the table, you either sign up or you go away. So I think there is now a really quite significant likelihood that we will leave with no deal on October the 31st.
Norman, for the moment, thank you. That is looking quite far ahead. But let's just look ahead to where we are this morning. It is just gone 9:30. You're watching BBC News live from Downing Street, where Theresa May, as we've been reporting, is expected to reveal later on this morning a timetable for her departure from Downing Street. That's after almost 3 years as Prime Minister. Now, we think she is currently meeting the chair of the party's backbench MPs, the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady, to discuss her plans. It's expected that the contest to find a new Conservative Party leader could start then in a fortnight's time. It's thought maybe June the 10th would be the most likely date for the start of that contest. So the pressure on the Prime Minister has really been intensifying in recent days, especially amid anger about her latest Brexit plan. So what happens next? Well, as we've said, Theresa May currently, we think, meeting Sir Graham Brady, although I have to be honest, we haven't seen him here. He may have come in through another entrance or even be talking to her on the phone. We're not sure, but we were told that they would be talking at 9 o'clock this morning. He's chairman of the Conservative backbench MPs, and he is basically saying to her, time is up, you need to go, and you need to tell us when exactly you're going. Now, the Prime Minister, after that meeting, all those talks with Sir Graham, could give a statement from here in Downing Street announcing her departure date. If she does resign, she probably won't actually step down straight away. She will still, we are told, be hosting President Trump during his state visit, which is in the early days of June. So the 10th of June, it is thought, could then mark the start of a Conservative Party leadership contest to select her successor. And that in turn would mean that July would probably be the earliest we'd see a new Prime Minister here at number 10. Let's hear from the former Conservative Chancellor, and father of the House of Commons, prominent pro-European and Remain campaigner Ken Clarke, who's been speaking on Radio 4's Today programme.
We are going to have a chaotic 6 weeks now as a diversion, a possibly harmful diversion from the deadlock on the European Union that we've had. And all kinds of things could happen. The favourite doesn't usually win, that is, the person expected to win hasn't won one of these for a very long time, as far as I can recall. We've got to make sure the whole thing is conducted in an atmosphere which doesn't add to the air of tragic farce which has already been surrounding the party and the European issue for the last 12 months. The European Reform Group, Research Group, the right wing of my party have finally got their woman. They've been trying to get rid of her for the last 2 or 3 months. They seem to imagine the party will now unite behind the one of them that most resembles Nigel Farage. I don't think it's going to be like that. I hope. I'm not sure I expect, but my earnest naive hope is we might concentrate on what exactly the answer of the new Prime Minister is going to be to all the problems, European problems, that defeated Theresa May.
So that's the Conservative Party former Chancellor Ken Clarke, grandee of the party, with his thoughts on what's going on right now. Let's get the thoughts of our assistant political editor, Norman Smith. Norman, well, we don't know exactly what's going on inside there. We were told that the Prime Minister was meeting Sir Graham for these absolutely crucial talks that would pave the way for her departure.
Now, situation normal, we don't know what's going on. I assume he must have gone in by some other door. It would seem to be unlikely that this sort of conversation, given the seriousness of it, is something you'd do over the phone. Not impossible, of course, but I would have thought unlikely. Maybe, I'm speculating here, maybe, it's been put back by half an hour or whatever. Maybe Mrs. May wants more time to gather her own thoughts. I assume she'll have to prepare some sort of statement too. These are important moments in the life of a Prime Minister. If you think how far Mrs. May was defined by her own words when she became Prime Minister, talking about tackling the burning injustices, and that became a sort of leitmotif for what she wanted to do, but was never able to do because her whole premiership was totally and utterly taken over by Brexit, that she never got on to that other agenda. And that's one of the other things that strikes me, although I guess there will be some sadness in Tory ranks that here was a Prime Minister who did her best, immense sense of public duty, but failed. At the same time, I think there will be relief. Relief in this sense that, Parliament has basically ground to a halt. I was speaking to one Tory MP the other day, and he was just saying to me, I didn't come here to do nothing. But that is what's happened. I mean, you would wander around Parliament on a Wednesday afternoon after PMQs and it'd be deserted. People had gone because there was no legislation, there was nothing to do. And all these many, many issues that everyone knows we face as a country, whether it be to do with housing, whether it be to do with social care, just were not being done. I mean, if you take social care, I've lost count of how many times, different health secretaries have said, I've got my green paper, we'll be producing it soon, we're going to do something. Everyone knows it's a massive, massive problem. Again and again, it's been put back and back and back. And I remember last time talking to Matthew Hancock and said, we're going to have to get Brexit sorted first. Well, that's not happening anytime soon. So if that's not happening anytime soon, none of the other myriad of difficulties are getting resolved. So I think there is in Parliament a sort of sense of we cannot go on like this, because genuinely Parliament has just ground to a halt. And so she had reached a position where she was never going to break the deadlock. She'd exhausted all her political capital. She'd run out of moves to play. And I suppose, there are plenty of people who say, well, you bring in a new leader, nothing really changes, the parliamentary arithmetic's the same Brexit conundrums. There's still Michel Barnier on the other side of the negotiating table. What's changed? But the analogy I draw is with, the struggling football team. They may still have the same useless group of players, the same fans, the same stadium, the same set of fixtures, but sometimes you get a new manager in and he can just unlock things a bit, and people do start to think anew and play afresh. Now, maybe you still go down to relegation, but sometimes it can work. And I think that is the hope, that maybe just a fresh face, fresh momentum, just perhaps could unlock things. It's still an almighty big ask, but it's not impossible.
And in terms of the hemorrhaging of support for her, we've seen it in the party at large around the country, on the backbenches, and in her cabinet. Which of those is the most important? What's been the fatal blow, in a sense?
Well, I think the fatal blow is the one that hasn't been struck, which is by the party in the country. Mrs May has never been a clubbable MP. She was never, I think, going to, have a solid base in the parliamentary party. There's never been a group of Mayites. So the parliamentary party was never going to be her base. The cabinet could never be her base because it was a sort of balancing act. I'll have some Brexiteers in here and I'll have some Remainers in here. She had to keep the two sides on board. The party in the country are her people. I mean, that is, she is a sort of true sort of rubber chicken circuit Tory, and that's not to say it in a demeaning sense. That is where she's drawn her strength, her roots, her identity as a Tory from ordinary grassroots Tories, and she loves that. That's her sort of thing, Tory party events in the constituency. So when I say the blow that hasn't been struck, we know that the National Conservative Convention was due to meet in an emergency meeting on June the 15th. And the overwhelming likelihood is they were going to pass a motion of no confidence in the PM. That has never happened before, never happened to any other Tory leader. So you imagine for Mrs May, that would have been like her own, pulling her down. And I think personally she would have found that very, very difficult. And in the back of her mind, I suspect she wanted to avoid that at all costs. And when they decided to hold that emergency general meeting, I think then she probably knew it was over.
And we don't know what's going to unfold here in Downing Street today. We expect she is going to announce this timetable. And I suppose the departure of any Prime Minister is always a moment of great political theatre, isn't it? However it happens, and it happens in different ways. We remember Margaret Thatcher sort of wiping away tears as she left. Not saying that Theresa May is going to actually leave Downing Street, but effectively sealing the end of her premiership.
Yeah, I suspect, once she does her statement, she will by and large dip below the political horizon. She'll probably go back to a constituency. There will be an absence of political activities. The next sort of real moment, and probably last real moment for Mrs May, will be with Donald Trump when he arrives to be here of June 3, 4, 5, and then the D-Day commemorations, which are important national moments. She will be there as a national symbol, not as a political figure. Curious one for Donald Trump, though. He's standing next to a Prime Minister who, is leaving. So they've always had this rather curious relationship. You kind of sense that although they spoke kindly about each other, they absolutely were not on the same political wavelength. So a curious one for him. Interesting to see, too, whether he, he's never shy about coming forward in any way, chooses to meet Boris Johnson or anything like that, whether he in any way gets entangled in the Tory leadership contest, and whether anyone would want him to get entangled in the Tory leadership contest. But I suspect, once Mrs May decides to go, she will sort of dip beneath the horizon, although she will still be Prime Minister probably until the end of July.
Norman, we're seeing chaps who seem to be setting up a sound system. Does this look to you as a Downing Street veteran like preparations possibly for a prime ministerial statement?
Usually you get Downing Street press officers coming out. Actually, I've just seen one talking to one of my colleagues who I presume has been told next 20 minutes, next half an hour. The usual sort of key factor is when you see the lectern brought out.
Yes,
then you
the
know
lectern moment.
The lectern moment, then you are in blast off. I see Larry's waiting for something to happen impatiently.
Larry the cat is
He's
waiting
seen it all
as we
before.
He's seen them come and go.
Yeah. So they're setting up the speakers. So where are we? 20 to 10. I guess you could have a 10 o'clock blast off. It does look like we are moving to the moment. It won't be dead on time because, of course, Mrs May has to think how she's going to project herself.
Because it's actually a statement that will, depending on what she says, it will be seen for years and years. It's a sort of moment of history.
Yeah, we will look back on it. It's also an immensely personal moment because, yes, she will stay as Prime Minister, but you are in effect saying, goodbye to all the staff and all the people who've stuck by you through thick and thin. And it's that moment of reckoning, really, that this is it. It is over. So emotionally, and Mrs May's never been a sort of very emotionally engaged politician, quite a difficult moment too, to try and strike the right tone. You don't want to be unnecessarily mawkish or anything like that, but it is a hard moment. And I guess too, she'll want to try and, I would guess, give a sense of hope, direction for the country. Yes, it has all ended in a bit of a car crash, but to give a sense that, it's not impossible. The successor does have something to build on. There are ways of trying to make progress. I think she'll want to give a bit of optimism that it's not, oh my God, it's all ended in tears. So I think she will want to also try and give a sense of optimism. And lastly, I think she'll want to try and at least bind her party together to avoid a complete and utter meltdown bloodbath with people running around in togas stabbing each other. Appeal for people to have a degree of respect for different arguments, because that's one of the things that's kind of slipped away in the whole Brexit thing. The language of Brexit has become increasingly violent, vociferous, and pretty unsavoury. She's never got into that. She has actually been very restrained in her language throughout, even though people have been, metaphorically hurling rocks at her. She's never gone in for that. She's always been quite a decorous politician in that sense. And I suspect she will want her party now not to go in for the complete bloodbath scenario, which, could be how this all turns out. So a lot for her to try and pull together, and I suspect that's what she's now doing, trying to get the words right, get a frame of mind right, and maybe just rehearse a few of the lines to make sure she projects it right.
Just seen Larry the cat being taken into number 10, so maybe...
No distractions, no one Larry hogging the limelight.
No, definitely not. Maybe the Prime Minister's going to have a little cuddle with the cat. Farewell cuddle with Larry the cat. Let's hear from one of those contenders that we've been talking about, who is likely to be part of the Conservative Party leadership race. Dominic Raab, prominent Leave campaigner, former Brexit secretary.
Well, there's clear discussions ongoing up in Westminster, and I think the Prime Minister needs, with her top team and with the 1922 committee, to have the time and the space to come to a resolution on this issue.
Are you going to be announcing your intention to join the race for the leadership of the party?
Well, I don't think we should get ahead of ourselves. I want to see what the results of the European elections are, and I want to see what the Prime Minister says later today.
How long do you think she can hang on in a caretaker role, as it were?
Well, as I said, I want to see her given the time and the space, the respect, and to make this decision with her dignity intact and with integrity, and I think I just want to allow her that time at the moment. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, fine.
So that was Dominic Raab speaking a little bit earlier on. Meanwhile, we think here in Downing Street the stage is being set for a prime ministerial announcement from Theresa May. We don't know what time that might be. We understood that she was meeting Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 Committee of Backbenchers, who was making it pretty clear to her that time had run out. She had run out of road. She has no option but to set out a timetable for her departure from number 10. And it is thought that that would be the 10th of June as the starting date for a leadership contest within the Conservative Party to find her successor. She would stay on as Prime Minister and she would, in fact, be caretaker Prime Minister until the new party leader and the new Prime Minister is selected. So let's just talk a little bit about the potential contestants in that Conservative leadership race once it does begin. It's already been heating up, frankly, in the last few days. Plenty of the candidates setting out their ideas for the country. So these are the main runners and riders. The former Foreign Secretary, of course, Boris Johnson. He's already confirmed he will stand in the race. He said, of course, he will be running. Esther McVeigh and Rory Stewart are other MPs who've officially declared they will stand. Mr Johnson, though, has been seen as really the front runner, it's true to say, amongst Brexit supporting grassroots Tory members. The question is whether he would get onto the ballot of the last two who would then be put to the country at large, and that is down to the MPs, the Tory MPs, whether they would select him as one of the two to be put to the National Party membership. Now, of course, he could face competition from Dominic Raab, who we were just hearing from, actually, the former Brexit Secretary, who has not officially announced that he would run, but he's certainly been setting out policies as he sees them for a future manifesto, particularly in an interview recently with the Sunday Times, including he talked about a cut to the basic rate of income tax. He has said he would not vote for Mrs May's new Brexit plan. He said, "I cannot support legislation that would be the vehicle for a second referendum or customs union." We can also talk about the Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, who we know went to see Theresa May yesterday. He hasn't confirmed either if he'll run for party leader, but like Dominic Raab, he's used a newspaper profile recently to introduce voters to his family. Foreign Secretary very much seen as perhaps a more moderate Brexit candidate than Mr Johnson and Mr Raab. Now let's just go, because here is the lectern. Let's just show you the scene in Downing Street right now, because the lectern has been produced, and Norman Smith was talking about it as the lectern moment, and that is when we know for sure that there is going to be a prime ministerial statement in the next few minutes. We can't say exactly what time, but that is the moment when, in the sunshine of Downing Street this morning, we think that Theresa May will come out of number 10 and announce the timetable for her departure from number 10. You can see the sound engineers there just getting everything ready for that statement. A little moment of history is about to unfold here in Downing Street as Theresa May, we think, will outline the timetable for her departure, and we think, we don't know, but that would mean that she would stay on as Prime Minister for the state visit of Donald Trump in early June, and then she would trigger a Tory party leadership contest on the 10th of June. All that time she would be staying on as Prime Minister. She'll be caretaker Prime Minister until the Conservative Party finds a successor. What happens is the Tory MPs come up with two candidates who are then put to the country at large, the National Conservative Party membership, and then they choose who will take over from Theresa May, not only, of course, as Tory party leader, but as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. So let's go back to Norman Smith, our assistant political editor. Well, as we suspected, and you've been telling us, Norman, that we're going to get a prime ministerial statement, and it looks like this is the end of the road for Theresa May as Prime Minister.
It does. I thought, Ben, I was going to be able to tell you what the Prime Minister was actually going to say, because I've been sent an email by Mrs May's office saying, "Dear member of the lobby, please see below a checked against delivery version of the Prime Minister's statement this morning. This is for immediate release." Unfortunately, it's then blanks. I can't.
That's so near and yet so far.
However, so there is going to be a statement, very obviously. I suspect we'll get that, probably the way things are going, next 15 minutes, just after 10, I think, is probably the likelihood. It's a huge moment for Mrs May, as we've been saying, personally, a moment of reflection. I suspect she will want to point to things she has achieved. That tends to be what prime ministers do. They like to sort of flag up how they would like to be remembered. Mrs May desperately does not want to just be known as the Prime Minister who tried and failed to deliver Brexit, albeit, let's be honest, that was her central mission.
And frankly, that is how she will be known.
It is, yes. Just as Tony Blair, in all probability, will be remembered for the Iraq War, so Mrs May will be remembered even more so for Brexit, because there really has been nothing else happening in politics for the past 2 or 3 years. We have in effect been totally overshadowed by the whole Brexit saga. All of which said, I'm sure she will want to point to, the additional funding for the NHS, for example, is one area where she will hope that, she might be remembered. But she faced an impossible task, I think, is the honest truth. Any politician was going to have enormous political skills and, above all, a political majority in Parliament, something she never had after she frittered away David Cameron's majority with that disastrous election campaign. And in a way, all the difficulties over Brexit kind of go back to that miscalculation. And what a miscalculation, because when they went into that election, the sort of psyche in Team May was, we're going to pummel Corbyn, we're going to get a stonking landslide, we can even win in Wales. As the campaign unfolded, suddenly Mrs May's character became much more of an issue. The Maybot was born, frankly, and support just disappeared, and the result was a hung Parliament. And that, it seems to me, undermined the prospects of getting a deal through Parliament, because Brexit is so contentious, so difficult. You need not just a majority, but quite a chunky majority to be able to push it through. So she was always facing an uphill struggle. Now, latterly, she's decided in a hung parliament the only way to kind of get round it is to bring on board the opposition. And so she did reach out to Labour in the knowledge that she couldn't get it through on the back of Tory votes or DUP votes, but frankly too late in the day. If she had done this whole cross-party thing a year, 2 years ago, I think there's a pretty good chance it would have paid off, and she could actually have got a deal not dissimilar to the one she's now put up and is now being torn down. She could have actually got it through Parliament, but she moved to the whole broader conciliatory cross-party approach far, far too late in the day, added to which I think Labour smelt blood, and they were in a different ball game. Okay. They're not interested in saving Mrs May. What they're after is a general election. Yep. And out of the chaos and upheaval of Mrs May going, they sent the opportunity of a general election.
Norman, thank you very much. We can talk now to the Conservative MP and member of the European Research Group of Tory backbenchers, Leave campaigners, Steve Baker, who's joining us via webcam. Well, you've been campaigning to topple Theresa May for quite some time now. Looks like you finally got your way. Are you happy?
Well, we haven't been campaigning to topple Theresa May. We've been campaigning for an EU exit policy which would meet people's expectations and leave us recognisably an independent country with our own domestic capacity for regulation and our own independent trade policy and so on. You know the arguments. But obviously I can't get away from the history that Jacob and I went out in the autumn last year and said that the Prime Minister should go then. We looked ahead and we could see a crisis coming if the policy was pursued. But I'm afraid today there's no escaping it. The situation is about both the policy and the person, and I'm afraid both need to change.
Some would say that you and fellow Tory MPs who have been opposed to her leadership, her premiership, have been disloyal, even treacherous.
Well, it's most unfortunate if people use language like that. I've always been steadfast in ensuring that I haven't described colleagues in that way. Going right back to the start of Conservatives for Britain at the 2015 election, I've always believed it was really important that we had a kind of culture of honour amongst us and that we showed a higher standard of leadership as we go on. So if people are using, unfortunately, abusive language like that, I really wish that they would stop. As we go forwards, it's going to really matter to a historic degree how every single Conservative member of Parliament behaves, and indeed how the DUP work with us. And I really think colleagues need to rise above that kind of condemnation and language.
If this is an announcement, which we are expecting in the next few minutes from Theresa May announcing her departure, will you give her credit for anything?
Of course. Look, we've got absolutely no desire to be mean-spirited to a Prime Minister who no doubt has behaved honourably in pursuing what she thought best. But unfortunately, partly, I would say mainly, because of the way the EU has behaved on sequencing and on delivering a deal which no self-respecting country could accept. Indeed, if you watch the Behind Closed Doors documentary, they described it as colony status. You know, this is most unfortunate. We certainly give Theresa May credit for being dutiful and diligent, honourably pursuing what she's seen as the national interest, and I think it's for her to define her legacy, not for me today, but we give her credit for a great many things.
What do you think happens next? Who do you think becomes the next Tory party leader and the next Prime Minister?
Well, I think that question has to be seen through the lens of events which will take place over the next couple of weeks. We're obviously now going into the Whitsun recess, so Conservative MPs will not be around to vote. We then have the visit of the President of the United States, and that is really important for the UK and the USA. We need to unite and make sure that is a success. The commemoration of D-Day. So it could be that nothing really moves on till the 10th of June, and that might really be reasonable and in the national interest. So perhaps Theresa May will announce today that she's standing down as leader of the Conservative Party, and perhaps it will be as late as the 10th of June. And I think either way, I think it could be seen as reasonable. And I say that because I do want the President's visit to be a success. We do want to have a successful commemoration of D-Day. These things matter in the life of our country and for our future.
But who do you want to be the next Tory party leader?
It's got to be somebody who believes in leaving the European Union. The two front-runners are very clearly Boris Johnson and Dominic Raab. I think they have complementary talents. There's no point shying away from it. People have been asking me to stand. I've had a degree of support from across the country that I could never have foreseen. I've also now had some members of Parliament asking me to stand. So I need to face up to the challenge of taking a decision whether I should do it. I need to talk to the other candidates, and I will need to reach a decision myself. But obviously, while I'm mulling that over, I couldn't possibly back another candidate.
So you could be a contender, could you?
It's conceivable, yes, and it's It's come about because at the third presentation of this deal, Boris Johnson and Dominic Raab, and indeed David Davis and Esther McVeigh, all voted for it, and I did not. And the combination of that and the, if I say so myself, the degree of servant leadership that I've provided to my colleagues for 4 years now, that has meant that some colleagues have said that I should consider it, and from outside Parliament I've had a lot of pressure to say I should stand. So obviously I must consider it out of respect for those colleagues and members of the public. So it's possible, yes.
Sounds like you're outlining a manifesto for yourself.
Well, I don't think I'd go that far. I mean, the truth is, over the last 4 years, I've been a leading figure in coordinating Eurosceptics, at times serving up to a third of the Conservative Party. You know, time and again, we have written down what we wanted, how to deliver things, why we needed to see things move on. I've always been at the centre of that. In particular, there's a publication called Better Deal, which we published after the first time we voted down the agreement in order to set out how we should proceed. Now, that was assembled from many people's work, but it was me who pulled it together and put a foreword in it. And I think these things have preceded people saying that I should consider it. It's never been part of a leadership campaign because only recently have I been asked to do it.
Okay, Steve Baker, very grateful to you for your time. Thanks for joining us live there from High Wycombe. Meanwhile, here in Downing Street, as you can see, the lectern is there, ready and waiting just behind me in the sunshine here in Downing Street, waiting for the Prime Minister to step out of number 10 and outline, we think, the timetable for her departure from Downing Street. You're watching BBC News. We are watching a BBC News special with me, Ben Brown, live here in Downing Street, where the Prime Minister is expected to make an official announcement in the next few minutes about her future. Our headlines. Ministers expect that Theresa May will announce a date for her resignation as Prime Minister today after a backlash by her own MPs against her latest Brexit plan. The stage is being set here in Downing Street for an imminent announcement by the Prime Minister. The 10th of June is widely expected to be the start of the leadership contest. Boris Johnson, Andrea Leadsom, Esther McVeigh and Rory Stewart have all already officially confirmed they will run, but senior Conservatives insist it's an open field.
All kinds of things could happen. The favourite doesn't usually win, that is, the person expected to win hasn't won one of these for a very long time.
A 10th of June timetable would mean that Theresa May will still be in office for Donald Trump's state visit to the UK, which is at the beginning of June. Well, good morning from Downing Street. Sunshine pouring in here and the stage set, as I say, with the lectern just behind me, and sound engineers have been busy working away, preparing for an announcement, an official announcement in the next few minutes, maybe in the next few seconds actually, from Theresa May, where it's expected she will reveal the timetable for her departure from number 10, after almost 3 years as Prime Minister. Now, it's thought that at around 9 o'clock this morning she met the head of the party's backbench MPs, the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady, who has been with her and telling her that effectively she doesn't have any choice but to leave. We're just seeing some party officials, including the Prime Minister's husband actually, Philip May, and Press Secretary Robbie Gibb there at the end of Downing Street. So I think the statement is imminent. I'm just going to step aside now because let's take a look at the lectern. And so this is a moment really that's been very much forced on the Prime Minister. Her leadership has been questioned not really only in the party at large around the country, but also on the Conservative backbenches. She has really hemorrhaged support there and indeed within her own cabinet. We know that the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary both went to see her yesterday, and it was all really after the latest proposals for getting her Brexit deal, her withdrawal agreement bill through Parliament. There was widespread anger about that, a backlash against that, and a lot of Conservative MPs and members of the Cabinet saying enough is enough. it is time to go. You've run out of road. And as we've been saying all morning, really, she is the Prime Minister who has been in office for nearly 3 years, but who will always be defined as the Brexit Prime Minister, who couldn't get Brexit through, who tried and tried and tried again so many times to get her Brexit deal through Parliament. But after that disastrous snap election, she never had the numbers on her own side to push that Brexit deal through the House of Commons. And she has spent her entire premiership really negotiating with the European Union to get a Brexit deal agreed with them, with her own MPs, and more latterly, of course, with Labour MPs in those cross-party talks with the Labour Party on trying to find a different route through to get her Brexit deal through the House of Commons. None of them, in the end, was successful. And there is a saying that all political careers end in failure. And here is Theresa May stepping out from number 10 to announce her plans.
Ever since I first stepped through the door behind me as Prime Minister, I have striven to make the United Kingdom a country that works not just for a privileged few, but for everyone, and to honour the result of the EU referendum. Back in 2016, we gave the British people a choice. Against all predictions, the British people voted to leave the European Union. I feel as certain today as I did 3 years ago that in a democracy, if you give people a choice, you have a duty to implement what they decide. I have done my best to do that. I negotiated the terms of our exit and a new relationship with our closest neighbours that protects jobs, our security and our union. I have done everything I can to convince MPs to back that deal. Sadly, I have not been able to do so. I tried 3 times. I believe it was right to persevere, even when the odds against success seemed high. But it is now clear to me that it is in the best interests of the country for a new Prime Minister to lead that effort. So I am today announcing that I will resign as leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party on Friday the 7th of June, so that a successor can be chosen. I've agreed with the party chairman and with the chairman of the 1922 committee that the process for electing a new leader should begin in the following week. I have kept Her Majesty the Queen fully informed of my intentions, and I will continue to serve as her Prime Minister until the process has concluded. It is, and will always remain, a matter of deep regret to me that I have not been able to deliver Brexit. It will be for my successor to seek a way forward that honours the result of the referendum. To succeed, he or she will have to find consensus in Parliament where I have not. Such a consensus can only be reached if those on all sides of the debate are willing to compromise. For many years, the great humanitarian Sir Nicholas Winton, who saved the lives of hundreds of children by arranging their evacuation from Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia through the Kinder transport, was my constituent in Maidenhead. At another time of political controversy, a few years before his death, he took me to one side at a local event and gave me a piece of advice. He said, "Never forget that compromise is not a dirty word. Life depends on compromise." He was right. As we strive to find the compromises we need in our politics, whether to deliver Brexit or to restore devolved government in Northern Ireland, we must remember what brought us here. Because the referendum was not just a call to leave the EU, but for profound change in our country. A call to make the United Kingdom a country that truly works for everyone. I'm proud of the progress we have made over the last 3 years. We have completed the work that David Cameron and George Osborne started. The deficit is almost eliminated. Our national debt is falling and we are bringing an end to austerity. My focus has been on ensuring that the good jobs of the future will be created in communities across the whole country, not just in London and the South East, through our modern industrial strategy. We have helped more people than ever enjoy the security of a job. We are building more homes and helping first-time buyers onto the housing ladder, so young people can enjoy the opportunities their parents did. And we are protecting the environment, eliminating plastic waste, tackling climate change, and improving air quality. This is what a decent, moderate and patriotic Conservative government on the common ground of British politics can achieve, even as we tackle the biggest peacetime challenge any government has faced. I know that the Conservative Party can renew itself in the years ahead, that we can deliver Brexit and serve the British people with policies inspired by our values. Security, freedom and opportunity. Those values have guided me throughout my career. But the unique privilege of this office is to use this platform to give a voice to the voiceless, to fight the burning injustices that still scar our society. That is why I put proper funding for mental health at the heart of our NHS long-term plan. It's why I'm ending the postcode lottery for survivors of domestic abuse. It is why the race disparity audit and gender pay reporting are shining a light on inequality, so it has nowhere to hide. And it is why I set up the independent public inquiry into the tragedy at Grenfell Tower, to search for the truth, so nothing like it can ever happen again, and so the people who lost their lives that night are never forgotten. Because this country is a union, not just a family of 4 nations, but a union of people, all of us. Whatever our background, the colour of our skin or who we love, we stand together, and together we have a great future. Our politics may be under strain, but there is so much that is good about this country, so much to be proud of, so much to be optimistic about. I will shortly leave the job that it has been the honour of my life to hold. The second female Prime Minister, but certainly not the last. I do so with no ill will, but with enormous and enduring gratitude to have had the opportunity to serve the country I love.
Well, the Prime Minister there clearly very emotional at the very end of that statement, almost in tears, saying that it had been the honour of her life to serve her country as Prime Minister, as the second female Prime Minister, she said, but certainly not the last. She stood there in the sunshine of Downing Street announcing the details of her long-awaited departure from office. She said she will resign as leader of the Conservative Party on Friday the 7th of June. She's agreed that with the Conservative Party chairman and also the chairman, Sir Graham Brady, of the 1922 Committee of Backbench MPs, who she met with earlier on this morning, and who was making it very clear to her that she had effectively lost the support of her backbench members of Parliament. And so after she does step down as Conservative Party leader, that is when she said the process of trying to find a new Conservative Party leader will begin. She said, I deeply regret that I have not been able to deliver Brexit. She talked about how trying to really enact the will of the voters from the 2016 referendum had been her challenge, and that it was of deep regret to her that she hadn't been able to make that happen. I have done my best to do that. She said, I have done everything I can to persuade members of Parliament, and tried 3 times to get her Brexit deal through Parliament, but failed, and said that that was for her a deep regret that she had not been able to deliver Brexit. She did also outline other areas of her premiership, other areas of her government, some of the things she thought that this government has achieved. Let's bring in our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, who's with me and was listening to that and watching that. Firstly, on a personal note, the Prime Minister at the end, understandably, very, very emotional.
It's a huge moment, and you know, she was close to tears at the end when she talked about how it would always be an honour to have served as Prime Minister, and she sort of welled up right at the end. And of course, it's a hugely emotional moment. Her husband Philip was watching on, as were her closest advisors from Downing Street. I thought a sort of, you know, a dignified statement, but also quite a defensive statement, saying, I've tried my best. I've done my best to try and get this through Parliament. I've done it 3 times. But I thought interesting too, a clear message to her successor. Compromise is not a dirty word. And I think that will be seen as a clear warning to those aiming to succeed her who perhaps thinking, right, let's go for it. Her take is no, you've got to bring people with you. If you want to get this through, you are going to have to compromise. And I think that was a clear message. Likewise, she talked about the compassionate, centrist Tory ground in the centre ground. Again, I think a message to whoever succeeds her, don't go bolting off to the right. That's not where the Tory party should be. So, you know, a number of different elements. She wanted to talk about her record, what she had achieved. She said she'd fulfilled the work of David Cameron in getting the deficit down, ending austerity. She talked about a bit about her race disparity unit, but inevitably all roads come back to Brexit. And, you know, as we sort of suggested beforehand, her pitch was, look, I've gone as far as I can. I've tried my hardest to convince MPs, but in the end, it is beyond me. And then that message to whoever replaces her earlier, actually, the contest starts earlier than we thought on June 7th. Whoever replaces her, look, just don't think you can do this by being hard Brexit or hard Remain. Compromise is not a dirty word.
Norman, for the moment, thank you. Let's just have another listen to the end of that statement that we've just been listening to from Theresa May, the Prime Minister, outlining her departure from Downing Street. She has said, just to repeat if you're just joining us, that she will resign as Conservative Party leader on Friday the 7th of June.
I will shortly leave the job that it has been the honour of my life to hold. The second female Prime Minister, but certainly not the last. I do so with no ill will, but with enormous and enduring gratitude to have had the opportunity to serve the country I love.
So that was just the end there of the Prime Minister's statement, as Norman Smith was saying, really welling up with emotion at the end of that statement, in which she outlined the timetable for her departure from Downing Street. The Friday the 7th of June is when she is officially resigning, although she will stay on as caretaker Prime Minister until a successor is found. Let's get some reaction immediately now from the Conservative MP Gareth Johnson, who resigned the government whip earlier on this year in protest at the Prime Minister's Brexit deal, and joins us via webcam from Kent. What's your reaction to the news? It was widely expected, widely anticipated, but now she has gone with a tear in her eye.
It's a very sad but arguably inevitable consequence of all that's happened over the last year. You know, understandably, the Prime Minister wants to set out the achievements, and she has had some during the time that she's been the PM. You know, certainly with the economy, with jobs and such, she's pointed out what's happened on the environment. But now the Conservative Party has to take time to reflect on that statement that she's just made, and then obviously go on to select a new leader and Prime Minister of the country.
And who do you think that new leader should be?
Well, there's plenty of talent out there. Personally, for me, I think that the person that can unite the Conservative Party, both Remain and Leave, is Dominic Raab. I think that he would be the person best suited to lead this country in a very difficult time. We'll have that contest. It'll be open, fair, and it will go to the membership of the Conservative Party, as it should rightly do, to ultimately decide between two people who will lead this country.
And she was saying very much in her message, appealing for a spirit of compromise and consensus. Is that possible, do you think, within the Conservative Party or within the country?
I think there's been a lot of compromise that's already taken place, whether that's the £39 billion or the implementation period. I think there's been many of us who've been willing to compromise. Myself and many others did support her deal on the last occasion because we feared there would be no Brexit if that didn't happen. So I think there is a spirit there to compromise, but we have to leave. You know, the people in 2016 said that we were leaving the European Union. That's what they wanted. That's what they demanded of the House of Parliament. And that's what we've got to deliver. And that will be the job for the new Prime Minister coming in. It's a priority of the country, but we want to get on with it so we can move on to all the other issues that people want us to obsess about. It's not just about Brexit.
Do you feel a measure of sympathy for Theresa May? As I said, she was close to tears at the end, saying that she had served her country. It had been a great honour, the greatest honour of her life to serve the country as the second female Prime Minister.
Yes, I do. And she has undoubtedly tried her best. She is a patriot. She is somebody who wanted to implement Brexit, but ultimately was unable to do that. She made some poor decisions. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And she's paid the ultimate price for those poor decisions. But I do feel sad. I feel sad for her personally. This is not a day to rejoice in any kind of way, shape or form, whatever you feel about Theresa May. She's tried to do her very best and get through the Brexit deal that she was a supporter of. But ultimately, you know, politics can be a very harsh business, and because she's not been able to deliver, she's had to go.
And last question, do you think her departure heightens the possibility or even the probability that we're going to have a no-deal Brexit now come the end of October?
I still think that there's scope for whoever comes in to renegotiate with the European Union, start afresh, if you like, to say, look, you know, we want to work on the backstop, which has actually been behind most of the problems with the deal. I do think the EU will look afresh at a new Prime Minister coming in, and we now have a chance of leaving with a deal, which is what I and most of my colleagues want to see. But we have to, as to coin a phrase, we have to leave with or without a deal. That's what must happen. It must happen at the very latest by the 31st of October. And I think once that's done, the country can then move on from something that has been hanging over us for a long time.
Gareth Johnson, thank you very much for being with us and giving us your reaction to the news that the Prime Minister has set out a timetable for her resignation, for her departure as party leader and Prime Minister. Friday, 7th of June is when she said in a statement here a short time ago that she will be stepping down. That will then pave the way for a leadership contest within the Conservative Party to select another leader and a new Prime Minister. Let's get more reaction from Peter Bone, another Conservative MP, prominent Leave campaigner. Are you happy that she's gone?
Well, she's done the right decision given the circumstances. It's a sad day for the Prime Minister, but I don't think there was any other option. I've always campaigned to change her policy but on the EU, and when she wasn't prepared to change her policy, I think it was right that she had to leave as Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party.
She said that she had done everything she could to implement Brexit. And that's true, isn't it? She did. She tried and tried it again.
I'm going to have to disagree with that. She could have been a national hero if she had kept to her word when she said we would leave the European Union on the 29th of March. I think she said that 108 times in the House of Commons. If she'd left with no deal on the 29th of March and it was her decision alone not to do that, she would have delivered Brexit and the Brexit everyone voted for. She chose not to do that, and I think from that point on it was inevitable that she would not serve for much longer.
She had, as we've been saying, had a tear in her eye at the end of that statement. She was quite emotional. She said it had been the greatest honour of her life to serve her country as Prime Minister, as the second female Prime Minister of this country. Do you have any measure of sympathy for her?
Oh, of course. I mean, she did what she thought was right. But when you have the biggest Commons defeat ever on your major policy, it would have been time for a rethink. And when the Prime Minister didn't rethink and pressed on, not just once more, but twice more, and was going to try again with the same policy that clearly was wrong, that was an error of judgment. And it's very sad for her that she's had to go, and she's done a lot for the country outside of the Brexit policy. But when you get the fundamental policy wrong, then in politics it's very harsh, and you have to go.
Well, there'll be people who'll say it's people like you who've brought her down, who've opposed her all the way.
Well, obviously the majority in Parliament would not vote for the deal under any circumstance. I think the last time was it defeated by 58, 59 votes. She just clearly didn't do what the people asked us to do in the referendum, and she didn't do what she said she was going to do, which was take us out of the 29th of March with or without a deal. That was the moment. That was
the people. Sorry, forgive me, but the people wanted to leave the European Union. They didn't say anything about leaving without a deal.
But everybody knew that if you couldn't, under the Article 50 process, if you don't reach a deal with the EU, and I absolutely don't blame the Prime Minister for this, I blame the EU for an impossible deal that they gave to the Prime Minister. If you don't do a deal, you came out on a no-deal basis. That was in our manifesto, that's what we said would happen. And when we broke the word, I fear that when we see the European Union election results on Sunday night, the party, the Conservative Party, one I've been a member for and active for more than 50 years, will have had its worst result ever.
OK, who are you going to vote for as the next leader?
Well, I think it clearly has to be someone who believes in leave. I think that's important. I also think it's someone who's not been associated with the dreadful withdrawal agreement. So it's somebody who's resigned from government. That needs to be, I would say, either Esther McVeigh, Dominic Raab, or David Davis, or Boris Johnson. I think David Davis has ruled himself out. I think the other issue is who can walk into number 10, who has the authority, who can actually walk on the world stage straight away, and who can win the next general election for the Conservative Party. And I conclude the only person
Do you think Boris Johnson can walk onto the world stage?
Absolutely. He was Foreign Secretary. He knows all the world leaders. I absolutely think that Boris Johnson is the right person, but it will be for the party to decide. It won't be for MPs to decide, and that's a great thing. Whoever the party chooses as the next Conservative leader and Prime Minister, I will support.
OK, Theresa May went out of her way to say we need compromise, we need consensus. Do you agree with that? Do we need a compromise consensus candidate to follow her as party leader?
Well, we need somebody who's going to go to the EU and say your deal was compromised all on the British side and not on the European Union side. I mean, you know, the 39 billion, the transition period, all these things, the requirement to be aligned with standards with the European Union, all these things, the European Court involved, these things were just not acceptable. And the compromise has all been on the United Kingdom side. We need to have a leader who will go back and say, let's renegotiate, let's do a comprehensive free trade agreement, and let's move forward. And I think the person to do that, as I said, is Boris Johnson.
OK, Peter Bone, thank you very much indeed. Let's just get the thoughts of another Conservative MP, actually, Pauline Latham, who's a member of the European Research Group, the Brexiteer group of Tory MPs who can join us from Derby. Thank you very much for being with us. What's your reaction to the news that the Prime Minister's set out a timetable now for her departure?
Well, it's a mixed reaction, really. Relief that the tension is over, because we've all been expecting this and it hasn't happened for some weeks, really. But also sadness, because clearly Theresa May did feel that she'd done the best for the country. She thought she'd done the best for the Conservative Party, but it wasn't good enough. And that is a sadness, because she tried, and she believes she tried as hard as she possibly could. The trouble is, Europe wouldn't compromise at all. And I think they let her down and let this country down. And now to be for a new leader to actually go out there and see what they can do, which has got to unite our country and our party, north and south, east and west. Doesn't matter where it is, they've got to unite the country first, but the party as well.
Well, some people might say, she might say, who knows, that you let her down, the European Research Group amongst others, her own Conservative backbench MPs who are constantly campaigning against her leadership and her policies.
No, they weren't constantly campaigning against her leadership. They were campaigning against a deal that we all felt was absolutely flawed, that we could not work with, we could not support. And it was people from all walks of life in Parliament. We're a very broad church, the ERG. It's not an extreme group. It is somebody from all wings of the party. So we didn't bring her down. The Parliament brought her down. She had the biggest defeat ever.
You did try to force her out at the end of last year.
Well, it wasn't. No, the ERG didn't. It was members of the Conservative Party who did, and they didn't succeed because they didn't win the vote of no confidence.
So, do you think now that she stayed too long, or is this timetable that she has announced reluctantly that she's going on June the 7th? Is that a kind of dignified exit when she was facing overwhelming pressure from within the party, within the cabinet, within the backbenches?
Yeah, I think she made a very dignified speech. I think she will be able to go out with dignity, having tried her level best to get it through. She's very sincere, she's very determined, but she didn't manage it, and I think she's realised now the time has come for her to go. And the good thing is she can see Trump, she can do the D-Day landing event, she can remain as Prime Minister until we have a new leader, which should be by the summer recess. And if not the summer recess, within a week or two, when the party members will decide by postal ballot. So we will put 2 candidates forward, and I hope this time we are able to put 2 and nobody backs out at the last minute, because it has to go to our membership to make the final decision. It's not going to be MPs doing it. There are a lot of MPs wanting to do the job. Some will fall at the first hurdle, but then it'll be whittled down to 2.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Pauline Latham, their Conservative MP. Well, let's just recap what's happened here. A dramatic morning, it has to be said, here in Downing Street. The Prime Minister coming out of number 10, standing at the lectern and setting out a timetable for her departure from the job that she said she loved, that it had been the greatest honour of her life to serve as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, as the second Prime Minister, the second female Prime Minister of this country, but she said certainly not the last female Prime Minister, and there was certainly a tear in her eye at the end of her statement when she said it had been the greatest honour of her life. Let's just listen to a bit of that statement once again.
Ever since I first stepped through the door behind me as Prime Minister, I have striven to make the United Kingdom a country that works not just for a privileged few, but for everyone, and to honour the result of the EU referendum. Back in 2016, we gave the British people a choice. Against all predictions, the British people voted to leave the European Union. I feel as certain today as I did 3 years ago that in a democracy, if you give people a choice, you have a duty to implement what they decide. I have done my best to do that. I negotiated the terms of our exit and a new relationship with our closest neighbours that protects jobs, our security and our union. I have done everything I can to convince MPs to back that deal. Sadly, I have not been able to do so. I tried 3 times. I believe it was right to persevere, even when the odds against success seemed high. But it is now clear to me that it is in the best interests of the country for a new Prime Minister to lead that effort. So I am today announced I will resign as leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party on Friday the 7th of June, so that a successor can be chosen. I've agreed with the party chairman and with the chairman of the 1922 committee that the process for electing a new leader should begin in the following week. I have kept Her Majesty the Queen fully informed of my intentions, and I will continue to serve as her Prime Minister until the process has concluded. It is, and will always remain, a matter of deep regret to me that I have not been able to deliver Brexit. It will be for my successor to seek a way forward that honours the result of the referendum. To succeed, he or she will have to find consensus in Parliament where I have not. Such a consensus can only be reached if those on all sides of the debate are willing to compromise. For many years, the great humanitarian Sir Nicholas Winton, who saved the lives of hundreds of children by arranging their evacuation from Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia through the Kindertransport, was my constituent in Maidenhead. At another time of political controversy, a few years before his death, he took me to one side at a local event and gave me a piece of advice. He said, "Never forget that compromise is not a dirty word. Life depends on compromise." He was right. As we strive to find the compromises we need in our politics, whether to deliver Brexit or to restore devolved government in Northern Ireland, we must remember what brought us here. Because the referendum was not just a call to leave the EU, but for profound change in our country. A call to make the United Kingdom a country that truly works for everyone. I'm proud of the progress we have made over the last 3 years. We have completed the work that David Cameron and George Osborne started. The deficit is almost eliminated. Our national debt is falling and we are bringing an end to austerity. My focus has been on ensuring that the good jobs of the future will be created in communities across the whole country, not just in London and the South East, through our modern industrial strategy. We have helped more people than ever enjoy the security of a job. We are building more homes and helping first-time buyers onto the housing ladder, so young people can enjoy the opportunities their parents did. And we are protecting the environment, eliminating plastic waste, tackling climate change, and improving air quality. This is what a decent, moderate and patriotic Conservative government, on the common ground of British politics, can achieve, even as we tackle the biggest peacetime challenge any government has faced. I know that the Conservative Party can renew itself in the years ahead, that we can deliver Brexit and serve the British people with policies inspired by our values. Security, freedom and opportunity. Those values have guided me throughout my career. But the unique privilege of this office is to use this platform to give a voice to the voiceless, to fight the burning injustices that still scar our society. That is why I put proper funding for mental health at the heart of our NHS long-term plan. It's why I'm ending the postcode lottery for survivors of domestic abuse. It is why the race disparity audit and gender pay reporting are shining a light on inequality, so it has nowhere to hide. And it is why I set up the independent public inquiry into the tragedy at Grenfell Tower, to search for the truth, so nothing like it can ever happen again, and so the people who lost their lives that night are never forgotten. Because this country is a union, not just a family of 4 nations, but a union of people, all of us. Whatever our background, the colour of our skin or who we love, we stand together, and together we have a great future. Our politics may be under strain, but there is so much that is good about this country, so much to be proud of, so much to be optimistic about. I will shortly leave the job that it has been the honour of my life to hold. The second female Prime Minister, but certainly not the last. I do so with no ill will, but with enormous and enduring gratitude to have had the opportunity to serve the country I love.
Well, a tearful Prime Minister at the very end of that statement here in Downing Street. Let's get more reaction to that statement and that timetable she outlined for her departure, June the 7th. Let's go to my colleague Geeta Guru-Murthy, who's at College Green, just down the road at Westminster, with more reaction to that. Geeta.
Ben, thank you. Just getting busy here on College Green as people digest that emotional statement. The Prime Minister, emotional, of course, a voice breaking at the end. But that statement has been much speculated about, enormous pressure on the Prime Minister and to announce her departure. With me is Kevin Maguire, Associate Editor of the Mirror newspaper. Yeah. Kevin, First of all, your reaction just to that statement, Theresa May tried to say compromise had been her way forward. Obviously she'd failed, enormous regrets that she has failed to deliver Brexit.
Yeah, she said she'd done her best, but it wasn't good enough. And Europe as an issue has now destroyed the last 4 Conservative Prime Ministers over 30 years. She was dealt a very difficult hand. She played it badly. She couldn't get through the House of Commons her compromise deal on leaving the European Union, and she would have been pushed if she didn't jump, because she's lost the confidence of her MPs and also her cabinet, her senior members. And whoever replaces her will find they don't have a majority in the House of Commons, and Britain leaving the European Union in an orderly way that protects jobs and protects incomes and security will require a compromise a paralysed Parliament is unable to reach.
Boris Johnson is the name that everyone thinks is the front runner to become the next Prime Minister. It is only the Conservative Party, first of all the MPs and then the membership, that get to choose the next Prime Minister. At such a time of enormous political division, is that the right way forward?
Yes, Boris Johnson, former Mayor of London, briefly a Foreign Secretary, seemed to go around the world insulting other people, blundered in Iran, a British citizen's jail sentence was extended, been sacked twice in his career for lying. He led the campaign for Brexit within the Conservative Party back in the 2016 referendum. A lot of the stuff he said, I would call him lies, other people would just say it was disputed, but he is the front runner. And the system in the Conservative Party, the right-wing majority party in government in Britain without a majority, is the MPs pick 2 names that then go to 120,000 members in the country. There will be enormous pressure to hold a general election so the British people decide who is Prime Minister rather than a party itself. But it's under the system we operate. It's legitimate the way they go forward, but the question is, will it have political legitimacy? Will people accept it? And there's going to be a big question mark over it, but he is the front runner.
And in terms of what happens over the next few days, Theresa May very emotional at the end of that statement. Were you surprised to see that? Because she has really held it together. She's been enormously resilient, if nothing else, hasn't she?
Yeah, the vicar's daughter is very buttoned up. She rarely shows emotion. In fact, she's been compared to a robot, a Maybot. And there at the end, we heard her voice breaking. It was very teary. Of course, she knows she's leaving Parliament a failure, leaving the Prime Ministership as a failure. She didn't do what she set out to do. Probably an impossible task, but she didn't achieve it. And I think if she'd have shown more emotion earlier in her premiership, people might have thought a bit better of it. Because she was always coming across as very cold, technocratic, and there was no real warmth.
Has she been dealt, though, an impossible hand? Could anyone have changed the way this whole Brexit process was handled, given the numbers in the building behind us? Parliament don't add up for any majority, and the next Prime Minister, whoever it is going to face exactly the same problem.
No, absolutely. Whoever becomes Prime Minister, the Conservative Party pick that Prime Minister, will find they don't have a majority in the House of Commons, and they will find that Brexit is an incredibly difficult issue. It isn't the easy leave deal that was promised 3 years ago. So I think she was given a difficult hand, but she made 2 strategic errors. One was holding a general election in 2017 when she thought she'd massively increase her majority, but ran a terrible campaign and saw her party lose its majority. And the second is she courted the very hardline Brexit camp in her own party, instead of reaching out to other parties to see if there was a compromise and common ground. So in one sense, yes, people will have sympathy for her, and she was dealt a very, very poor hand, but she played it badly, and she, in the end, is the author of her own downfall.
And just looking ahead, apart from Boris Johnson, who are the other key frontrunners? Because the Tory leadership process is very unpredictable. Boris was knocked out, of course, last time. Well, he chose to stand aside, but he was betrayed, as some see it, by his running mate Michael Gove. I mean, who are the other key figures that could emerge? Who do you think has got the numbers in Parliament at the moment?
No, absolutely. In the Conservative Party, there is a history of the frontrunner falling before the end of the race and not actually winning. But he will be challenged by Dominic Raab, a former Brexit secretary. Again, he is very Brexit-y, but there's about 20 Conservatives now saying they will run. It's going to be an incredibly big field. A lot of them will fall very, very quickly. I think it's Boris Johnson's to lose now. However, weeks ago, he wasn't in the running. And what's happened is the Conservative Party have done so badly recently, they've got very desperate. And when you go for desperate, you go for your wild card. And they see they're threatened by Nigel Farage, a former Conservative who now heads a Brexit party, often described as a snake oil salesman. Well, one minister said the way to fight a snake oil salesman is with another snake oil salesman. I think that's a wrong analysis. I think they're making a mistake there, but I think that's the thinking.
In terms of what a Prime Minister Boris Johnson could achieve, though, again, realistically, a lot of speculation about, for example, whether he will get moderate support from people like Amber Rudd and the more centrist Conservatives. But ultimately, what would he offer? Would he have to offer a second referendum? Because, again, there is no majority that he can get through Parliament.
Yeah, he really blows hot and cold, Boris Johnson. One moment he'll be socially liberal, the next he will be racist, making jokes about Muslim women, Black Britons and so on. But he can appeal to the one nation wing, the sort of centrist part of his party. But on this question of Brexit, the only way he can move forward is with compromise. And I'm not sure he will be capable of getting a compromise within his party, because I'm not sure the Conservative Party is in a mood to compromise. And that means we seem to be stuck in Britain. Now, we know in Parliament MPs are against leaving without a deal. October the 31st is the latest deadline, Halloween. But on what terms would they leave? We just don't know, and it's probably not there. And it's also quite interesting that Conservative MPs want yet another vote to elect their own leader and a Prime Minister, but they still oppose a second vote in the country in a fresh referendum on Brexit itself.
Kevin Maguire, thanks very much indeed. And of course, Theresa May announcing that she will go by June the 7th. That is 2 weeks today. Ben.
Geeta, thank you very much indeed. Well, we've been getting some reaction to that resignation statement here in Downing Street on Twitter. Former Brexit Secretary, who's expected to be one of the contenders to succeed Theresa May, Dominic Raab, said she was, quote, dignified as ever. Theresa May showed her integrity and she remains a dedicated public servant, patriot and loyal Conservative. Michael Gove, their Environment Secretary, also heaping praise on her. That's what he said, a very moving statement from the Prime Minister, who deserves our respect and gratitude. The International Trade Secretary, Liam Fox, also saying that the Prime Minister had acted with dignity and honour in pursuit of what she believes to be the national interest, the hallmark of her time in public life. And responding to the Prime Minister's tears at the end of the speech, Heidi Allen, MP, saying, "Oh, Theresa May, why didn't we see that emotion more? Things could have been so different," reflecting what I think Kevin Maguire was actually just saying, that perhaps she should have shown the more emotional side of herself in public at an earlier stage of her premiership. Andrea Leadsom, who resigned from the cabinet on Wednesday, who's another one widely expected to run for the leadership, just saying there on Twitter, a very dignified speech by Theresa May, an illustration of her total commitment to country and duty. She did her utmost and I wish her all the best. Well, let's get more reaction from the former Conservative MP and Minister David Mellor, who joins us now from central London. Well, it was, David Mellor, quite an emotional speech, especially at the very end there. Did you feel a measure of sympathy for her as she announced her timetable for resignation?
No. Someone once wrote about the death of little Nell. You need a heart of stone not to laugh. Look, Theresa May should never have been Prime Minister. She didn't have the qualifications for it in terms of achievement, in terms of temperament, in terms of her ability to be a proper leader, and having inherited the Conservative Party in a mess because of David Cameron's antics, she left the Conservative Party in an even bigger mess now. Dennis Healey always said, if when you're in a hole, stop digging. She continued to dig, and she's hung on beyond her time. She says she wanted to implement Brexit, something about which I, by the way, am extremely dubious. And far from Brexit, what she was trying to do was Brino, namely the sort of things that her civil servants managed to negotiate with the EU, because she didn't trust her ministers enough to give them the sort of hand they needed to stand a chance of getting an agreement that either Parliament or the country would subscribe to. And I think this is, a terrible, terrible moment for the Conservative Party. I first joined the Conservative Party 55 years ago. I've never, ever thought I'd see the Conservative Party in the mess that it's in right now. And by the way, the mere fact that Theresa May goes does not mean the end of the mess. I feel a bit Churchillian about this. It's not the end or even the beginning of the end, merely the end of the beginning. And the ability of the Conservative Party, which is not a united party anymore, to rip itself apart, we're just going to begin to see that, I suspect, during what will be an extremely divisive leadership campaign.
Well, a leadership campaign at the end of which, who do you think will emerge as Theresa May's successor?
Well, it's very difficult to say. I mean, there are apparently 17 candidates. If you're a racing man, if you've got 17 trainers in a race saying their horse has got a chance of winning, what you know, of course, is there isn't a decent horse in the race. And that may be the situation the Conservative Party finds itself in. My view is that Boris Johnson will, of course, come through. Don't forget, this is not an electorate, a large body of people. This is a selectorate. It's Conservative members of Parliament, and then it's the ever-declining membership of the Conservative Party, 125,000 of them, predominantly elderly, predominantly committed to a Brexit that is unachievable. So I think Boris Johnson will be there. I hope up against him will be a sensible person with more of an open mind who can lead the Conservative Party back to the centre ground. My own view would be a man who's got the experience, but also has got, one hopes, the cleverness and fast footwork to be able to negotiate his way around all of this, is Jeremy Hunt. I think some of the others who are in the race are either God did not bless them with the ability any more than he blessed Theresa May with the ability to be an effective Prime Minister. There are also some who have virtually no experience of anything. And please believe, having spent nearly 20 years in Parliament and 11 years in what was mainly quite a successful period in government for the Conservatives, to be even a successful minister is difficult. To be a successful Prime Minister, almost impossible. And a lot of those people, they're just not of that stature.
OK, David Mellor, for the moment, thank you. We're just seeing pictures from our helicopter there, just lost that Prime Ministerial motorcade in the trees there, but driving down the Mall, we don't know if she's going to see the Queen to possibly fill in Her Majesty with what she has been announcing about her timetable for departure from Downing Street. But we've been hearing also tributes to the Prime Minister from the Scottish Conservative leader Ruth Davidson, saying as Britain's second female Prime Minister, she's been a role model for girls and women across the UK, showing there is no glass ceiling to their ambitions. And that was a point that the Prime Minister did make during her address, that she had been the second female Prime Minister in this country and would certainly not be the last, she said. And also Sajid Javid, the Home Secretary, saying nobody could have worked harder or had a greater sense of duty than the Prime Minister. And this is her car, so we'll bring you more details on the Prime Minister's movements as they come into us. But it's 3 years ago that Theresa May became Prime Minister, and for many the only surprise really was that she lasted as long as she did when she first became Prime Minister. Some people were saying she could only last weeks or even days. Well, once a reluctant supporter of EU membership, she won the top job in the turmoil that followed the 2016 Brexit referendum vote. Vicky Young looks back now on her premiership.
Theresa May rose to the top job at one of the most turbulent periods in British political history. After the UK's vote to leave the European Union, David Cameron dramatically resigned, and extraordinary infighting amongst other leadership contenders left the path clear for Mrs May to become the country's second female Prime Minister.
As we leave the European Union, we will forge a bold, new, positive role for ourselves in the world. And we will make Britain a country that works not for a privileged few, but for every one of us.
During her first months as Prime Minister, she was under constant pressure to lay out her approach to Brexit negotiations, but refused to give much away.
Brexit means Brexit, and we're going to make a success of it.
Becoming Prime Minister had been a long-held ambition. The daughter of a vicar, Theresa, as she then was mainly state-educated in Oxfordshire before studying geography at Oxford University. In her third year, she met her future husband, Philip. After graduating, Mrs May went to work in the city, but she saw her future in politics. She became a councillor in South London, and after standing for Parliament twice, she was elected the MP for Maidenhead in 1997. The Conservative Party at Westminster was dominated by men, but Theresa May dared to flaunt her feminine side with a love of fashion and a flamboyant taste in shoes, which fascinated photographers. As party chairman, she made the case for Conservative modernisation, telling her party some hard truths during their years in opposition.
Our base is too narrow, and so occasionally are our sympathies. You know what some people call us? The nasty party.
When David Cameron became Prime Minister, he unexpectedly promoted Theresa May to Home Secretary in the coalition government with the Liberal Democrats. Despite failing to bring net migration down to the Conservatives' target of the tens of thousands, she was the longest-serving Home Secretary of modern times. But as Prime Minister, she faced an even tougher challenge, steering the UK and her party through Brexit. She triggered Article 50, the formal notification telling Brussels that Britain would be leaving the EU. And then this most cautious of politicians became one of Westminster's biggest risk-takers.
Since I became Prime Minister, I have said that there should be no election until 2020. But now I have concluded that the only way to guarantee certainty and stability for the years ahead is to hold this election and seek your support for the decisions I must take.
Mrs May said she'd called the general election to strengthen her hand in the Brexit negotiations, but her huge gamble backfired. She lost the Conservatives their majority, only hanging on to power through a deal with the DUP. Her political misjudgment left her weakened.
Boris asked me to give...
Her attempts to reassert her authority didn't always go according to plan. Her message during this important conference speech was lost amid a catalogue of interruptions, a prankster, a faulty set and persistent cough. After months of negotiations with Brussels, Mrs May agreed a withdrawal deal, but the compromise to avoid border checks on the island of Ireland wasn't one that many in her party or her partners in government, the DUP, could accept.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
That was an historic defeat in the Commons, and MPs voted against it twice more. Mrs May was forced to ask the EU for a delay to Brexit. Her last throw of the dice was to appeal to Labour. Weeks of talks got nowhere, but she went ahead with a promise to MPs that they could decide whether to hold a second referendum. It was too much for many Conservatives. They watched as Nigel Farage's new Brexit party surged in popularity and finally moved against her. Theresa May never wanted Brexit to define her time in office, but the momentous decision to leave the European Union was the backdrop to everything her government did. She was praised for her tenacity and sense of duty in the face of so many setbacks, but critics said she lacked vision and regarded Brexit as a damage limitation exercise. Once more, the issue of Europe has ended the career of a Conservative leader. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, let's just tell you that we've had some reaction from the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, to Theresa May's announcement that she is stepping down on June the 7th. There it is. Theresa May is right to resign, says Jeremy Corbyn. She has now accepted what the country has known for months. She cannot govern, and nor can her divided and disintegrating party. Whoever becomes the new Tory leader must let the people decide our country's future through an immediate general election. Those are the words of Jeremy Corbyn. Let's talk to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith. Well, that's Jeremy Corbyn's reaction. What do you make of that?
Not very surprised, to be honest. Mr Corbyn's been calling for a general election for some time. Will it happen? Almost certainly not, because if you are a new Tory leader, I would think in the wake of the local elections, the European elections, the Brexit shambles, the last thing you're going to want to do is to go to the country. So I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. It's not a complete non-starter, because you could see a scenario where you get a new leader faced with the same old parliamentary arithmetic, can't get his or her way through. So the only way you do it is to shake up the arithmetic. Now, you could have a scenario where a new Tory leader comes in, gets a bit of momentum, and maybe thinks, you know what, I will call a general election just to see if I can get a majority to push through with Brexit. I think it's unlikely, given that Mrs May tried pretty much the same trick when she took over, thinking she could kind of get a bounce to go into a sort of Brexit election and a majority blew up in her face, and she was sort of kiboshed ever afterwards. So I don't think that is what's going to happen. But I did think it interesting in her resignation statement. Of course, you know, there were the emotional moments, there were the reflective moments, there were the defensive moments. I thought the most interesting thing was the sort of pointed messages to her party and to her successor, which bluntly were, don't think of abandoning Brexit, you have to deliver on it. 2, you've got to compromise. And 3, stay in the centre ground. Now, there will be some, I suspect, who think, well, she could have learned those lessons herself, and if she'd compromised earlier and reached out to Labour earlier, she may have been able to get a deal through, but she started to do that much too late in the day.
Norman, thank you very much indeed. Well, it's been a momentous, historic morning here in Downing Street. Europe consuming another Conservative Party leader, another Conservative Prime Minister as well. Theresa May announcing the timetable for her departure after huge pressure from the Conservative Party, her cabinet and the backbenchers. She will step down as party leader on June the 7th. You're watching special BBC News coverage, more coverage for viewers in the UK on BBC Two and the BBC News channel. You're watching a BBC News special with me, Ben Brown, live here in Downing Street, where Theresa May has announced she will quit as Conservative leader on the 7th of June. Our headlines. In an emotional statement, Mrs May said she had done her best to honour the result of the EU referendum and that it was a matter of deep regret that she has been unable to deliver Brexit.
I do so with no ill will, but with enormous and enduring gratitude to have had the opportunity to serve the country I love.
Well, her emotional announcement paves the way for a contest to decide a new Prime Minister who will take on the job of trying to deliver Brexit. Boris Johnson, Andrea Leadsom, Esther McVeigh and Rory Stewart have already confirmed they will run, but dozens of other ministers are thought to be considering their options too. The timetable means Theresa May will still be in office for President Donald Trump's state visit to the UK at the beginning of June. Hello, an emotional Theresa May has announced that she will step down as the Conservative Party leader on Friday the 7th of June. In a statement here just outside number 10 in the sunlight, she said she would stay on as Prime Minister until a replacement has been found. Mrs May said she had reached the decision after realising that she could not get her Brexit deal through Parliament. And as she reached the end of her statement, Mrs May was close to tears, saying that the job had been an honour to hold. Here's what she had to say.
I will shortly leave the job that it has been the honour of my life to hold. The second female Prime Minister, but certainly not the last. I do so with no ill will, but with enormous and enduring gratitude to have had the opportunity to serve the country I love.
The Prime Minister there talking with real emotion about the honour it had been to be Prime Minister of the country that she loves. Our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, was watching that with me. And in some ways, I suppose, a surprisingly emotional end to that statement, because she is not a politician who is associated with emotion.
I can't recall ever seeing Theresa May in tears, close to tears. She's never been one of those politicians who sort of wears their heart on their sleeve. She's always been quite buttoned up, restrained. Particular type of English reserve, actually. Quite a shy politician. So to see her very close to sort of breaking down in tears, I think it tells us two things. One is, I mean, she was a politician driven by public duty. And there must be for her a sense, frankly, of failure. I know she pointed out things which she says she has achieved, but the overarching objective of her premiership was Brexit. That has failed, for now, anyway. The second part is, I don't think one should underestimate the scale of rejection for a Prime Minister. And it was rejection. You have been basically told, we don't want you anymore. You can't do this. And that is tough, to stand up there and be so publicly rejected. Now, her departure is not nearly as brutal as many. If you lose an election, the removal vans come in, you're out, goodbye, good night. That is really brutal. Mrs. May's got a bit of time. But if you just think, if you're in that situation yourself and you've got sort of your husband and your closest friends standing watching you, you've got the world's media in front of you, of course it's charged. And I think for her, she genuinely felt she had done everything she could. She twisted and turned every way. She tacked this way, tacked that way. And I suspect many of her staff will be reading some of the tweets and messages now from the likes of Boris Johnson and other Brexiteers, saying how dignified she is, how stoical, and thinking, yeah, right, well, it's thanks to you guys this has happened.
Yeah, and they say all political careers end in failure, which hers obviously has, but there's also this incredible phenomenon about Europe consuming Conservative Party leaders and prime ministers, and she's just the latest.
Yeah, I mean, every single Tory Party leader in recent history has been brought down by Europe, because I guess for the Tory Party it's a sort of visceral issue for many of them. It's all wrapped up in issues around patriotism and country and identity and history, and for many of them it trumps a natural party allegiance, which is why it's such a divisive issue, because frankly many Tories are prepared to put Brexit, Europe, before their party. So it's just extraordinarily difficult for the party, and that's why there's been ongoing civil war. I think what has happened, though, and what makes the whole sort of situation ever more impossible to resolve, is it has spilled out from the Tory party into our body politic and into our country. And if we're honest, we are now a profoundly divided country. And it is genuinely, I know everyone says we've got to bring the country together. It's not easy to see how you do that now. I mean, Mrs. May's message was, we've got to compromise, but one of the things I think that follows from referendums is they drive people apart. If you look in Scotland, you tend to either be a nationalist or a unionist, and those that cling to the centre ground, like the Labour Party in Scotland has tried to pursue this more centre position, they just end up being destroyed. And referendums drive people apart. They push them into separate camps, and you're kind of forced into the conclusion that the only way people come together again is time. So whoever takes over from Mrs. May, they certainly won't have a magic wand to bring the country together. Maybe they can change the tone of the conversation. That would be a start, because it has become so visceral. But, it's a gargantuan task. So you're talking about someone who can not only deal with the complexity of the Brexit, fashion a deal, which they can get through Parliament, but also begin the healing process in the country. That is, some politician, not obvious that person is around.
Yeah, Norman, thank you. And Theresa May did talk in her statement about the need for compromise, That was a significant part of her statement, the need for consensus. Anyway, we've been getting plenty of reaction to the Prime Minister's announcement here in Downing Street from some of her cabinet, former cabinet ministers as well. Possible leadership contender, the Environment Secretary Michael Gove, saying it was a moving speech from a Prime Minister who deserves our respect and gratitude. Thank you, Theresa May. He has been very loyal to her. Dominic Raab, the former Brexit Secretary, also expected to be one of the contenders to be her successor. Dominic Raab saying that she was dignified as ever. Theresa May showed her integrity. She remains a dedicated public servant, patriot and loyal Conservative. One of those people that Norman Smith was just talking about, who actually the Prime Minister may not be too grateful to for those words of support. But anyway, the International Trade Secretary, Dr. Liam Fox, saying that the Prime Minister had acted with dignity and honour in pursuit of what she believes to be in the national interest, the hallmark of her time in public life. And responding to the Prime Minister's tears at the end of her speech, Heidi Allen, who quit the party to become an independent MP with Change UK over Mrs May's Brexit policy, asked, why didn't we see that emotion more? Things could have been so different. Andrea Leadsom, who resigned on Wednesday from the Cabinet, who's also widely expected to run for the leadership herself, said the speech was very dignified, an illustration of her total commitment to country and duty. She did her utmost, and I wish her all the very best. And one other bit of reaction, actually, just from Ruth Davidson, the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, just highlighting what the Prime Minister was saying about she had been Britain's second female Prime Minister, and Ruth Davidson saying that as Britain's second female Prime Minister, she's been a role model for girls and women across the UK. Showing there is no glass ceiling to their ambitions. Anyway, let's get more reaction. We can go just down the road at Westminster to Geeta Guru-Murthy, who's outside the Houses of Parliament for us. Geeta.
Ben, thanks very much indeed. We're just gathering some reaction here opposite the Houses of Parliament. And with me are three guests. Lord Kenneth Baker, who was, of course, former Tory party chairman when Margaret Thatcher was forced out, Sonia Soda from The Observer, and Isabel Oakeshott, a pro-Brexit political commentator. Thanks all. Right. Lord Baker, first of all, your thoughts today on Theresa May's resignation statement?
Well, it was sad but inevitable. Because from the very beginning she was unfortunately a weak Prime Minister because she did not have a majority in the House of Commons after the election which she called, and that put her in a very weak position. She couldn't, for example, control her own cabinet. She could not dismiss cabinet ministers who disagreed with her, and again in the House of Commons, when you don't have overall control, dissident groups grow, and there were very dissident groups, both Leave and Remain. It made her life very, very difficult. And the new leader will also have the same problem. But I think what the new leader has got to do, he's got to ensure that Britain does leave the European Union on the 31st of October. That is what the Tory party will expect of him. He's got to win back from Nigel Farage all those Conservative voters who voted for him yesterday.
You say he because all the money at the moment is on Boris Johnson. Would you support a Boris Johnson premiership?
Well, let's wait and see. Let's see what the manifestos are. He's certainly the most popular candidate indeed, but he's got to be a Prime Minister who's capable actually of delivery. That is the test.
Let me just bring in Sonia Soda. First of all, on Theresa May, she said, of course, she was the second female Prime Minister. She was emotional at the end, the first time really we've seen her like that.
Absolutely, and I think, it's clearly an emotional time for her. She's resisted pressure to go to an absolute incredible degree, really, when you think about it, that she's hung on this long. But I thought what was interesting about her statement was it was emotional, but she also kind of listed her achievements in office, and for me, they were incredibly thin, actually. And what she's going to be remembered for is the Prime Minister who found it really hard to compromise, really hard to build consensus in the Commons. Lord Baker has talked about her not having a majority. Well, she lost that majority, didn't she? She took a gamble, went to a general election and lost. And so I think she's going to be remembered for the Prime Minister who just couldn't deliver Brexit, but also didn't achieve very much in office. Brexit has just consumed all the political oxygen of her premiership.
Isabel Oakeshott, Theresa May, the way that she's handled Brexit has seen by so many as utterly damaging. She wasn't the right person at the right time.
Well, it has been an abject failure, her premiership. It's always a brutal moment watching a Prime Minister announce their resignation, and you'd have to be inhuman not to feel a pang of compassion for her. But the reality is that she has humiliated this country. She has absolutely failed to deliver on the key thing that she had to do. She had one job, it was delivering Brexit, and I was struck that in her resignation statement she talked about the value of compromise, but it is precisely her determination to compromise that led to her downfall. Ironically, had she been prepared to push through a no-deal Brexit, she would still be where she wants to be, which is in number 10.
I don't see that, actually, because I genuinely don't think her party, I don't think Parliament would have let her get a no-deal Brexit through Parliament. So I don't think that would have kind of sustained her in office. I think, all focus is going to move to what's next after this. And the tricky thing is that the Tory party are now going to spend the next few weeks infighting, trying to select a new leader. Nothing's going to happen on Brexit, and none of the parliamentary arithmetic changes. So we've still got a Commons that's incredibly divided, no majority in favour of anything constructive. So I suspect that, even if it is Boris Johnson as Prime Minister next up, Theresa May talked about compromise going forwards as well. The next Tory Prime Minister is going to have a job on their hands as well.
The difficulty, I wouldn't really criticise Theresa May for lacking compromise. The Brexiteers don't accept compromise, and the Remainers don't accept compromise. And that is the difficulty in British politics at the moment. There's great passions dividing us. It always has been. Europe has always been like the Bermuda Triangle for the Conservative Party. You sail into it and you disappear without trace.
Boris Johnson, no matter what he does, how can he get anything through the building behind us, through the Commons? And without any majority, will he be forced to call either an election, which for the Conservatives like you risks a Corbyn government, or a second referendum, which most people in the Conservative Party House don't want?
I don't think there's a majority in the House of Commons for a second referendum. I'd rule that out. I just don't think they'll do that, whatever happens. I know the Labour Party, Keith Starmer, would like it, because he's essentially a Remainer. I don't think he'll either precipitate a general election either. I think that the Conservatives and the DUP will have enough, in fact, to survive any no-confidence vote. And that's the political reality. And I think that whoever leads the Conservative Party will have to commit themselves to leaving on the 31st of October. We've had March the 29th, we've had April the 12th, no more. And I think, quite frankly, Europe will want us to go. The elections that took place yesterday across Europe are going to change Europe fundamentally. We've been negotiating with the old Europe, Barnier, and the centralised control from Brussels. But all the people who got elected yesterday, the populist movement, are not that way at all. Not that way at all. And they will be starting to influence the attitudes of Europe.
Do you think that Farage is a force, that side of politics is a force that can be stopped now that it's been unleashed, given that Brexit looks far from being resolved and both Conservative and Labour have both seen a hammering in support?
I think it's very difficult. I think both main parties have got a view to Farage and what they can do to sort of stop the meteoric rise we've seen in recent weeks of the Brexit Party. I think the problem is, though, is that Farage is standing there on the sidelines with his betrayal narrative. That is very much, the Faragian style of politics. And I think whatever happens next, I think if there were another referendum, I think if there was a compromised Brexit, a soft Brexit, I think if there was a hard Brexit, a Tory PM got that through, and there was huge economic consequences, growing regional inequalities across the country, which is what all the predictions say. Whatever happens, Farage is going to be standing there saying the country has been betrayed. These people haven't delivered Brexit. So I think he is quite difficult to stop in the here and now.
Just finally, briefly, Isabel, Conservative Party leadership races are very unpredictable. If it's not Boris, who is most likely to lead the Tories now?
Doesn't usually win, actually, and I think that possibly Dominic Raab has a very good chance for precisely the reasons of the threat of the Brexit Party. Dominic Raab probably will commit to a no-deal Brexit, and that will spike the guns of some of the right-wing critics.
Okay, Isabel Oakeshott, Sonia Soda and Lord Kenneth Baker, thank you all very much indeed. So just a flavour of reaction, much more, of course, on Twitter. Back to you, Ben.
Geeta, thank you very much indeed. Well, you were talking there about Nigel Farage. We've just actually had a tweet from him with his reaction to what the Prime Minister was saying here in Downing Street a short time ago. And Nigel Farage, the Brexit Party leader, saying it is difficult not to feel for Mrs May, but politically she misjudged the mood of the country and her party. And also Nigel Farage saying 2 Tory leaders have now gone whose instincts were pro-EU. Either the party learns that lesson or it dies. So that's what Nigel Farage has been saying. Well, let's have another listen to the Prime Minister's statement. She came out from number 10 into Downing Street, into a pool of sunlight, stood at the lectern just behind me and announced a timetable for her departure from, as she described it, the job that she loved and that it has been the greatest honour of her life to spend time as the Prime Minister of this country.
Back in 2016, we gave the British people a choice. Against all predictions, the British people voted to leave the European Union. I feel as certain today as I did 3 years ago that in a democracy, if you give people a choice, you have a duty to implement what they decide. I have done my best to do that. I negotiated the terms of our exit and a new relationship with our closest neighbours that protects jobs, our security and our union. I have done everything I can to convince MPs to back that deal. Sadly, I have not been able to do so. I tried 3 times. I believe it was right to persevere, even when the odds against success seemed high. But it is now clear to me that it is in the best interests of the country for a new Prime Minister to lead that effort. So I am today announcing that I will resign as leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party on Friday the 7th of June, so that a successor can be chosen. I've agreed with the party chairman and with the chairman of the 1922 committee that the process for electing a new leader should begin in the following week. I have kept Her Majesty the Queen fully informed of my intentions, and I will continue to serve as her Prime Minister until the process has concluded. It is, and will always remain, a matter of deep regret to me that I have not been able to deliver Brexit. It will be for my successor to seek a way forward that honours the result of the referendum. To succeed, he or she will have to find consensus in Parliament where I have not. Such a consensus can only be reached if those on all sides of the debate are willing to compromise.
Just an excerpt there of the Prime Minister's statement, and when it got to the end of that statement, she was close to breaking down in tears, really, talking about the honour that it had been for her to serve her country, the country that she loved. So Theresa May then revealing the timetable for her departure from number 10, almost 3 years after she became Prime Minister. Now, she announced that she will resign in 2 weeks' time on the 7th of June. Some had thought it would be the 10th of June, but it's the 7th, Friday the 7th. The leadership contest will then begin the following week, and Mrs May will remain as Prime Minister until her successor as Conservative Party leader is chosen, which could be sometime in July. So that means we probably see a new Prime Minister in number 10 at some stage in the month of July. Let's talk to Joey Jones, a former spokesperson for Theresa May, who's in our London newsroom. Joey, thanks very much for being with us. Well, you know Theresa May well. What would have been going through her mind as she prepared to make that historic statement here in Downing Street?
I think she'll have been trying to sort of block out the noise and just get focused on the task at hand and not think too much about the magnitude of it, because I think that, to be honest, had she done that, then all that emotion that we saw well up so powerfully right at the end of the speech would have crowded in upon her. I myself, at a human level, I was a bit apprehensive ahead of the speech, knowing that she has broken down. Obviously, her voice has given way at certain, big moments, conference speeches, and in the House of Commons in the past. So there's at a human level a relief that she's managed to get through that. And in the final moments of the speech, there was a sort of flash of defiance where she talked, and steel, where she talked about the fact that she was the second woman Prime Minister and wouldn't be the last. She also said that she bore no ill will as she left the job that she loved. But I think obviously everybody watching will remember particularly how the emotion just became uncontrollable for her, just showing how much this means for her.
Yeah, a woman and a Prime Minister and a politician who isn't normally associated with emotion. In a way, maybe like Margaret Thatcher wasn't really associated with emotion until we saw tears from her as well when she was leaving Downing Street.
I think it's a bit different in the sense that with Theresa May, the human frailty is always quite evident, and I think that even when she came into office as Prime Minister, the fact that she plainly is awkward, quite shy, sort of gauche, finds it difficult in some social situations, and indeed, some situations where you would expect a sort of all-powerful Prime Minister to prosper, was part of her appeal. It was so very different to David Cameron, the smooth former PR man, just at ease in any situation that came before her, and in some ways quite appealing. So there's always been an air of vulnerability and frailty that many people in the country have warmed to. The problem was that after the general election didn't go the way that she wanted, then you weren't able to combine that cut me and I bleed humanity, if you like, with power. And without the power, then the frailty just became weakness, and that is what obviously has corroded her period, her second period, if you like, in Downing Street post-election. And that also, I would say, Ben, that was also the period where she started talking about compromise, because as your previous panel were saying, compromise wasn't a word really that passed her lips so very often in the first months, where she wanted, I think, to bulldoze and bludgeon through a Brexit deal. It was only when she had to reach out to others and try to muddle together a coalition that she recognised the need of compromise. Not right at the start, I think it's fair to say.
And effectively, I suppose it's true to say she's been driven out by the party, by her backbenchers, by her cabinet, by the party around the country in a way. Will she be bitter about that? Will she be angry, do you think? Will there be a residual anger within her?
Well, today, according to her own words, she leaves with no ill will. At times over the past few months, then the frustration and the anger have bubbled to the surface quite regularly, and I would imagine that as she looks back in the months ahead, she will certainly feel that it's not just her who bears the brunt of blame for the disaster that has confronted us and that continues to confound Westminster politics. You know what? I would say there's one thing that she may be able to look forward to, and it's a pretty poor victory compared with the ones that she would have hoped for, but she may be able to console herself with the fact that 6 months down the line, maybe a year down the line, one of those members of the awkward squad, one of those people that's been a thorn in her side, perhaps, who knows, the former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, might be in her job and finding it every bit as difficult as she did, and she would be entitled in that context to say, I told you so. But as I say, that's not what she wished for, far from it.
And a last question, I suppose, Joey, how will she be remembered? Will she be remembered as the Brexit Prime Minister who failed to achieve Brexit?
I suspect she'll be remembered as a rather beleaguered figure who was unable to shape forces that were too big for her but might have been too big for anybody else. I think that what we're looking at in the Brexit post-referendum dynamic goes, or it looks, has looked over the past few months as though it's actually bigger than personalities. There's nobody, she has felt, that has a better plan. Well, her plan has run into the ground. Let's see if she was right, and let's let somebody else have a go now.
Joey Jones, former spokesperson for Theresa May, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts and analysis. Well, it was 3 years ago that Theresa May became the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and for many the only surprise really was that she lasted as long as she did. When she first went into number 10, some people were saying she'd last weeks, maybe only days. She was once a reluctant supporter of EU membership, but she won the top job in the turmoil that followed the 2016 Brexit referendum vote. Our chief political correspondent Vicky Young looks back on her premiership.
Theresa May rose to the top job at one of the most turbulent periods in British political history. After the UK's vote to leave the European Union, David Cameron dramatically resigned, and extraordinary infighting amongst other leadership contenders left the path clear for Mrs May to become the country's second female Prime Minister.
As we leave the European Union, we will forge a bold, new, positive role for ourselves in the world. And we will make Britain a country that works not for a privileged few, but for every one of us.
During her first months as Prime Minister, she was under constant pressure to lay out her approach to Brexit negotiations, but refused to give much away.
Brexit means Brexit, and we're going to make a success of it.
Becoming Prime Minister had been a long-held ambition. The daughter of a vicar, Theresa Brazier, as she then was mainly state-educated in Oxfordshire before studying geography at Oxford University. In her third year, she met her future husband, Philip. After graduating, Mrs May went to work in the city, but she saw her future in politics. She became a councillor in South London, and after standing for Parliament twice, she was elected the MP for Maidenhead in 1997. The Conservative Party at Westminster was dominated by men, but Theresa May dared to flaunt her feminine side with a love of fashion and a flamboyant taste in shoes, which fascinated photographers. As party chairman, she made the case for Conservative modernisation, telling her party some hard truths during their years in opposition.
Our base is too narrow, and so occasionally are our sympathies. You know what some people call us? The nasty party.
When David Cameron became Prime Minister, he unexpectedly promoted Theresa May to Home Secretary in the coalition government with the Liberal Democrats. Despite failing to bring net migration down to the Conservatives' target of the tens of thousands, she was the longest-serving Home Secretary of modern times. But as Prime Minister, she faced an even tougher challenge, steering the UK and her party through Brexit. She triggered Article 50, the formal notification telling Brussels that Britain would be leaving the EU. And then this most cautious of politicians became one of Westminster's biggest risk-takers.
Since I became Prime Minister, I have said that there should be no election until 2020. But now I have concluded that the only way to guarantee certainty and stability for the years ahead is to hold this election and seek your support for the decisions I must take.
Mrs May said she'd called the general election to strengthen her hand in the Brexit negotiations, but her huge gamble backfired. She lost the Conservatives their majority, only hanging on to power through a deal with the DUP. Her political misjudgment left her weakened.
Boris asked me to give...
Her attempts to reassert her authority didn't always go according to plan. Her message during this important conference speech was lost amid a catalogue of interruptions, a prankster, a faulty set and persistent cough.
Excuse me.
After months of negotiations with Brussels, Mrs May agreed a withdrawal deal, but the compromise to avoid border checks on the island of Ireland wasn't one that many in her party or her partners in government, the DUP, could accept.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
That was an historic defeat in the Commons, and MPs voted against it twice more. Mrs May was forced to ask the EU for a delay to Brexit. Her last throw of the dice was to appeal to Labour. Weeks of talks got nowhere, but she went ahead with a promise to MPs that they could decide whether to hold a second referendum. It was too much for many Conservatives. They watched as Nigel Farage's new Brexit party surged in popularity and finally moved against her. Theresa May never wanted Brexit to define her time in office, but the momentous decision to leave the European Union was the backdrop to everything her government did. She was praised for her tenacity and sense of duty in the face of so many setbacks, but critics said she lacked vision and regarded Brexit as a damage limitation exercise. Once more, the issue of Europe has ended the career of a Conservative leader. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, there's been lots of reaction coming in to Theresa May's address here in Downing Street, in which she outlined her departure from Number 10. We've just been hearing on Twitter from Arlene Foster, leader of the Democratic Unionists, who are, of course, the party who've been propping up Mrs May in government. And Arlene Foster saying after the general election in June 2017, we worked with the Prime Minister and her team through the confidence and supply agreement. While at times there were differences in our approach, particularly on Brexit, we enjoyed a respectful and courteous relationship. In particular, I commend and thank the Prime Minister for her dutiful approach on national issues and her willingness to recognise Northern Ireland's need for additional resources through confidence and supply arrangements. I pay tribute to her selfless service in the interests of the United Kingdom. and wish her well in the future. So plenty of tributes coming in for the Prime Minister, or a lot of people, opponents as well, paying tribute to her sense of honour and sense of duty. And a short while ago I spoke to the Conservative MP Gareth Johnson. He resigned the government whip earlier this year in protest at the Prime Minister's Brexit deal.
I still think that there's scope for whoever comes in to renegotiate with the European Union, start afresh, if you like, to say, look, we want to work on the backstop, which has actually been behind most of the problems with the deal. I do think the EU will look afresh at a new Prime Minister coming in, and we now have a chance of leaving with a deal, which is what I and most of my colleagues want to see. But we have to, as to coin a phrase, we have to leave with or without a deal. That's what must happen. It must happen at the very latest by the 31st of October. And I think once that's done, the country can then move on from something that has been hanging over us for a long time.
So that was Gareth Johnson. And earlier I spoke to the Conservative MP and member of the Brexit Select Committee, Peter Bone.
She's done the right decision given the circumstances. It's a sad day for the Prime Minister, but I don't think there was any other option. I've always campaigned to change her policy but on the EU, and when she wasn't prepared to change her policy, I think it was right that she had to leave as Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party.
She said that she had done everything she could to implement Brexit. And that's true, isn't it? She did. She tried and tried it again.
I'm going to have to disagree with that. She could have been a national hero if she'd kept to her word when she said we would leave the European Union on the 29th of March. I think she said that 108 times in the House of Commons. If she'd left with no deal on the 29th of March and it was her decision alone not to do that, she would have delivered Brexit and the Brexit everyone voted for. She chose not to do that, and I think from that point on it was inevitable that she would not serve for much longer.
Peter Bone with his thoughts on the Prime Minister's departure. Let's get the thoughts of two veteran Downing Street observers, Caroline Wheeler, Deputy Political Editor of the Sunday Times, Sebastian Payne, Whitehall Correspondent of the Financial Times. Were you surprised?
I think that this has been the inevitability of what was going to happen this week, pretty much from when we started seeing that big, bold offer start to disintegrate. I mean, that was very much seen as the sort of final throw of the dice. And when it became apparent that actually it was sending the numbers completely in the wrong direction, it soon became very clear, I think, to many that it wasn't going to be long before the Prime Minister announced her departure, particularly with that pressure coming from the 1922 committee, who have had numerous meetings to decide whether they're going to change the rules in order to force her hand.
Sebastian Payne, what was the tipping point? What finally pushed her over the edge, as it were?
It was that speech the Prime Minister gave a couple of days ago, which feels like a lifetime ago now, where she announced her final Brexit offering, which included the possibility of a second referendum and a customs union. And this was meant to be Mrs May's final attempt to get Brexit through the House of Commons. But by trying to reach out to the Labour Party, she actually really pushed her own party too far. Those Conservatives who really don't want a second referendum, they absolutely don't want a customs union, they went to Mrs May and just said, you can't do this. And the anger that she created really just did it for her. And there was also a lot of trust broken, that people in the cabinet felt that Mrs May had gone against what she told them by putting that so clearly in her speech and in the legislation. And we know that Sajid Javid, the Home Secretary, and Jeremy Hunt, the Foreign Secretary, both went to see Mrs May and essentially said, you can't bring this bill forward, and if you can't bring the bill forward, then the time is essentially up. We've known for months Mrs May was going to go, and now it's finally happened.
Is it a classic case of the men in grey suits coming to wheel away the Prime Minister?
Well, I think what was interesting was that each of them, the Cabinet versus the 1922 Committee, were each kind of looking to each other to sort of wield the final, knife in terms of getting rid of the Prime Minister. Certainly, I think that it was impactful what happened yesterday with, as Sebastian was saying, the Health Secretary and the Home Secretary going in and saying, it's time to go, Mrs May. But of course, what's precipitated today's announcement is that actually she was going to meet with Graham Brady again. There was a strong possibility that they were going to finally change the rules, and it was really a case of her jumping before she was pushed.
And what about the statement itself? Very emotional at the very end. What did you make of that? Some people are saying, well, if she'd shown a bit more emotion earlier on in her premiership, she might have made a few more friends.
Look, whatever you say about Theresa May and how she's acted, she clearly has done what she thinks is in the national interest. You could see in her face and in her words earlier today that she really has tried her best. You know, she's done what she thinks is the best way to get Brexit delivered. But there was a tinge of a silver sword there, almost perhaps, when she said that about the need to compromise, because she knows that whoever comes next in Downing Street is going to be a more hardline Brexiter, and that person will struggle just as much as she did to get Brexit through the House of Commons. And she's saying, you know, compromise is a good thing, and the fact is her party haven't compromised, and the fact that they weren't willing to accept this later compromise package just shows that whoever is the next occupant of Downing Street is going to have just as big, if not even greater challenge than Mrs May.
Which takes us to the question, who is going to be the next occupant of the door behind us, the house behind us?
Well, that is the big question, isn't it? And of course, we know that there are numerous candidates who are sort of setting themselves up to run in this race. I think at the last count there were up to 20 potential runners and riders for this particular contest. Of course, everybody is talking about Boris Johnson. It was only a week ago that we saw that polling done amongst grassroots members, which suggested that Boris was way out in front among those grassroots members. But of course, we've got to go through the parliamentary stages of that first, which involves a series of knockout rounds. It's usually 2 a week until we get to those final 2. Now, if he gets to those final 2, I think most people accept that Boris Johnson is towering above any other rival in terms of his support amongst Conservative Party members. But the question is, will he get there? There's already talk about sort of stop Boris campaigns, particularly amongst those Conservative MPs who fear that he will undo some of the work that was done in Scotland over the independence referendum and let in the SNP. And so there's going to be a few efforts, I think, still to try and stop him reaching.
But is it Boris Johnson's to lose, would you say, Sebastian?
Absolutely, and I think the greatest enemy to Boris Johnson becoming Prime Minister is Boris Johnson. That we know he has a series of saying silly things, of gaffes, of missteps. You know, look back to the summer of 2016. He was the favourite then, and he tripped himself over within days of the contest beginning. But what we do know from past Conservative leadership contests is that the favourite very rarely wins, and this thing is probably going to be very quick. We don't know the exact timetable yet. Mrs May is going to resign as Tory party leader on the 7th of June. There's going to be a big push to get this whole thing done by the middle of July, because time is of the essence. You know, the next Brexit deadline is October the 31st, and the idea of the Conservative Party having a long contest that might be seen as quite self-indulgent that went on throughout the summer, I think there'll be a lot of pushback against that. So a short contest is actually very good for Boris, because he will come in on his unity message, and we've sort of seen this in his tweet. He's going to try and do compromise in the way that Mrs May suggested, but how that's going to work in reality, I don't know, because for Brexit it's the same fundamental things. There's no majority in Parliament for anything. The EU doesn't want to renegotiate the deal, and Parliament doesn't want a no deal, so all those roads do point towards a general election at some point.
But do they also point to a heightened possibility of a no-deal Brexit if it's somebody like Dominic Raab taking over, or even Boris Johnson, who would just happily let us leave without a deal?
I think that's always a possibility. I mean, I don't think anybody is going to stand on that actual mandate in terms of saying that is the preferred option. From what I'm gathering, most people are going to say the preferred option is to leave with a deal. But ultimately, if we can't get a deal that basically enables it to get through the House of Commons, then no deal is the sort of default option. And of course, as Sebastian was saying, it's not that long now until that October deadline, where we again either need to seek a longer transition and a longer extension of Article 50, or we again face ourselves in that sort of cliff edge scenario where we leave without a deal.
All right, thanks to both of you. Caroline Wheeler, Deputy Political Editor of the Sunday Times, Sebastian Payne, Whitehall Correspondent of the Financial Times. Many thanks for your thoughts and analysis. Let's get more now from my colleague Geeta Guru-Murthy, who is just outside the House of Parliament, just down the road from me at Westminster. Geeta.
On College Green, where a number of journalists and crews have gathered. Inevitably, this is a big moment, the announcement of a new departure from Downing Street. It's always emotional, and it's also turbulent, and it comes, of course, at a key crossroads politically in the UK. I'm joined by two guests to discuss this. Asa Bennett, who is the Brexit commissioning editor for the Telegraph newspaper, and Tom Swarbrick, who used to work for Theresa May in communications. Tom, just watching that statement, first of all, emotional from Theresa May. Her voice broke at the end. What is she going to be remembered for? What was your response to it?
Well, I thought it was very sad for a number of reasons. Very sad to see it come to an end in the way that it did. I thought the statement itself was very dignified, and sad too that it was necessary for her to go at this particular moment. People often say that the Maybot doesn't display any emotion. Well, I never saw that in my time working for her. She was displaying of emotion when I was in there. I think that.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah, I think there are loads of examples. When she was with Grenfell survivors in the church on that particularly difficult week, she was there supporting them, hugging them, talking to them. I think the idea that she was totally, it was incompatible for her to be a human being and to empathise with people is rubbish.
Isabel, that statement, your response?
Well, absolutely. You really have to feel for her when her voice is cracking in the same way that David Cameron's did on pretty much the same lines, speaking about the country she loves, what an honour it was. Definitely you saw, there was many years of public service. She tried her best. Clearly the options were closing off, and, clearly the Tory colleagues were despairing for, the dire strait of events we now saw, given that she was driven on by duty and duty alone to really persist for the last few weeks. And then now she's had to bow to the inevitable. And so obviously at this time, then she could hopefully preside over a smooth and orderly succession to a Tory Prime Minister who can actually bring back the fight for Brexit and fight Jeremy Corbyn.
Is Boris definitely a shoo-in? Obviously the Telegraph totally backing him. How many numbers of Tory MPs does he definitely have in the bag?
Well, this is the thing. He definitely has a good few dozen, handfuls, quite a healthy amount, it seems, that puts him, really safely out front. But the trouble is, the reason I'm sort of fudging the figures is because there's almost this kind of quantum level of support, Schrodinger's cat level. It's both there and who knows where else it might go, in a sense, because we are dealing with, as many people would say, the most duplicitous electorate in Westminster in the name of the Tory Parliamentary Party. And so many MPs will be currently having sort of coffee with all sorts of MPs, trying their options, shopping around. But nonetheless, you're seeing some real big hitters nonetheless come around for Boris, like Jacob Rees-Mogg, the ERG chairman. And so with him, that will give the real ERG stamp of approval. Many of the ERG will be going with Mr Mogg, and at the same time Gavin Williamson, of course, the former Defence Secretary sacked by Theresa May. It seems that he's also helping press the flesh and press Boris's case, and almost, you may argue, if you want to look for a Machiavellian motive and plot there, perhaps it is attempted revenge by trying to make the man that Theresa fears most Prime Minister.
Surely not.
The fact that if Theresa May does lose to a Brexiteer who goes for a WTO exit, if that is possible, if the House of Commons allows that, that is a complete failure, isn't it, of everything that she's tried to achieve, trying to keep the Conservatives together?
Well, it's a failing to get a deal by exiting on WTO terms, and Boris Johnson has suggested in the past that a deal is the thing that we need in order to leave properly. I think any Conservative leader who makes it a central plank of Brexit policy to leave on WTO terms faces a really, really difficult few months when they get in, because Parliament isn't behind it. I think a lot of Conservative MPs would find that particularly difficult to support. And so the overtures from people like Boris Johnson thus far, from what I can gather, Asa may know better, is that he actually would like a deal, a different deal, but it's going to have to be negotiated very, very quickly, given the deadline is October.
What about the more centrist grouping of MPs, people like Amber Rudd, Jeremy Hunt, Sajid Javid? How strong is their chance? And is it possible that Boris Johnson, in your view, would not get through to those final two?
I don't know. I mean, that will, I think, probably depend on the length of the campaign itself. You can see why certain people would be rather more happy if the campaign were very, very short and it was more of a coronation. So let's see, but the overtures are happening, and it's barely been below the surface, this leadership campaign, for some time. But you're right, there are plenty of people within the Conservative Party who do not want, one, to see a WTO Brexit made the central plank of policy, and two, to see Boris Johnson leading it. Dominic Grieve earlier this morning suggesting he would have to think very, very hard about continuing to be in the Conservative Party if Boris Johnson were leading it.
Just finally, briefly, Asa Bennett, is it Boris Johnson's to lose? What might stop him? Who might stop him? Who's he worried about?
Well, I think it's that if there's a longer leadership contest, then the momentum might drain away because other people can introduce themselves to the party. So it stands, what favours him is if it's short and quick, because then they'll go with the favourite, the man who tops the polls, the best person to beat Jeremy Corbyn, Boris Johnson.
Asa Bennett and Tom Swarbrick, thank you both very much indeed. Just a flavour of some of the reaction within Conservative supporting commentators. Ben.
All right, Geeta, we'll get more reaction now, actually, because we can talk to Mark Francois, MP, Conservative MP, prominent Brexiteer as well. Thanks very much for being with us, Mark Francois. Well, you've been trying to get rid of the Prime Minister for ages. You must be delighted.
Well, I don't know if delight is the right word to use in these circumstances, but it's true. I can't be a hypocrite. I have been calling publicly for her to resign for a long while because, unfortunately, she was trying to impose a withdrawal agreement on the House of Commons that, in effect, would have meant we remained in the European Union. So that would have betrayed the spirit of the referendum. So, I felt she had to go, and I think a lot of my colleagues have sensed for a long while that this was inevitable, and now we finally come to that point.
Have you got anything good to say about her premiership?
I can't be a hypocrite. I've never thought she was a great Prime Minister. And, in the end, I'm afraid she lost, as we clearly saw, she lost the support of her members of Parliament and many members of her cabinet. And she certainly lost the support of Conservative members in the country. I think probably when history looks back and entering into talks with Jeremy Corbyn, with a Marxist, I think for many Conservatives was really the final straw. So it's sad that it's come to this, but unfortunately she didn't listen to people. She wouldn't take advice, and so unfortunately the dancing queen has met her Waterloo.
How long have you been thinking up that line? Anyway, thank you. What did you feel there a measure of sympathy, Mark Francois, when she was close to tears at the end of her address when she announced her timetable for departure?
No, it was clearly, an extremely emotional moment. It must have been, in fairness, extremely difficult for her to deliver that speech. I think, as a politician, we all have to deliver speeches, but that's in a kind of a category of its own. So, of course, it was extremely, difficult for her. But, I think now what we have to do is to look to the future, and we need to begin the process of electing a new leader, who I believe will almost certainly be a Brexiteer, although it remains yet to see which one. And hopefully a Prime Minister who's really committed to leaving the European Union, who will actually lead us out of the EU and then honour the result of the vote of 17.4 million people.
Well, you say which one. Which one would you vote for?
I genuinely haven't decided. It will be a Brexiteer. If someone like Steve Baker were to run, I might be attracted to vote for Steve. Remember, like me, he continued to vote against the withdrawal agreement, even on so-called meaningful vote 3. Boris folded, Dom folded, Steve didn't. So, I'm not sure whether he's going to run or not, but if he did, I'd probably be quite tempted to vote for Steve Baker.
Well, we were talking to Steve Baker an hour or so ago, and he said he's thinking seriously about running. But, could you really imagine Steve Baker, to be honest, a man who not many people in the country have even heard of, being the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom?
Well, not that many people had heard of David Cameron before he became the Prime Minister. He came from out of the middle ranks, gave this barnstorming speech at the Tory party conference when everybody thought it was David Davis's to lose, became the Prime Minister, and personally, while he's had his critics, having worked for him, I always thought on balance Cameron was quite a good Prime Minister.
Mark Francois, very good to talk to you. Thank you very much for your thoughts and for being with us here on BBC News. Let's talk to one of your colleagues now, Andrew Bridgen, MP. And what's your reaction to Theresa May's statement here in Downing Street?
Well, I think everyone knew it was coming. In the end, it was a very dignified speech by the Prime Minister, clearly in the public interest for her to announce her departure. Obviously very emotional at the end. The most difficult speech any Prime Minister will ever have to give, and I think we did see a little bit of the personal side of Theresa May. Perhaps people would like to have seen a bit more of that while she was in office.
She talked a lot about the need for compromise now. But what would you like to see happen in the party? Who would you like to see take over as party leader and as Prime Minister?
Well, let's be clear, you can't compromise on a binary decision. That Parliament gave the decision to the British people on whether we remain or leave the European Union. 1.3 million vote majority for leaving the European Union. You are either in or you're out, and that was the problem with the withdrawal agreement. It wasn't going to get us out of the European Union. It was actually a staying in agreement, and ultimately trying to push that through for the fourth time with the withdrawal agreement bill brought the Prime Minister down. I would like to see a Brexiteer in as Prime Minister. The fight for the heart and soul of the Conservative Party starts now. There are no more vicious personal attacks than in a Conservative Party leadership election. They often turn into some sort of circular firing squad, and we've got to ensure we don't end up with a nun from the Outer Hebrides leading us because they're the only ones standing afterwards.
Good to talk to you. Thank you for your time. Andrew Bridgen, Conservative MP. And we can go to Brussels now, join our correspondent there, Adam Fleming, who's been gathering a little bit of reaction, I hope, Adam, to the momentous news we've had here in Downing Street.
Yeah, so we've just had the daily press briefing from the European Commission. Remember, that's the bit of the EU that has run the Brexit talks on a day-to-day basis. And they've said, as well as paying tribute to Theresa May for being a kind of good negotiating partner, they've said that as far as they're concerned, nothing has changed. Theresa May will still be Prime Minister for quite some time, because it'll take a while to find her replacement. And then her replacement may take some time to come up with a position about what they want to do about the Brexit deal. And then they may come here and try and renegotiate. But when you ask people about whether there's anything that's up for negotiation, they say no. The deal that is the deal is the one that's on the table, and there will be no changes to it as far as the EU is concerned. Certainly not to the Brexit, the divorce bit of the Brexit deal, the withdrawal agreement, which contains the Northern Irish backstop. As we've said for ages, really the only room for manoeuvre is on the other document, the political declaration, which sketches out the shape of the future relationship. And that was already written in a way to allow a big spectrum of potential outcomes, from a very basic free trade agreement, so a kind of more distant relationship, right up to a much, much closer relationship, if that's what the UK wanted to pursue. In terms of leaders, we've had quite a few statements from people, actually, which I'm quite surprised about, because I thought they'd want to keep quiet about it. Emmanuel Macron, the Elysee Palace, saying it's important that there is swift clarification about what the UK wants. So in other words, the Elysee and President Macron want this leadership contest to be done pretty quickly, the UK to reach a settled position, and then make it known to everyone else. Leo Varadkar, very warm words from him, saying that he had actually forged quite a close personal relationship with Theresa May, and that he's exceptionally grateful that the UK and Ireland have agreed that no matter what happens with the Brexit negotiation and the deal, lots of things will still be preserved between the relationship between Northern Ireland and Ireland. That's what he was saying. Charles Michel, the Prime Minister of Belgium, here in Belgium, saying that he wants to thank her for her resolve and cooperation, and saying that an orderly exit remains the priority. In other words, do what you can to avoid a no deal. And very similar from Mark Rutte, the Dutch Prime Minister, saying that he spoke to Theresa May personally, thanked her for her said that he respected her and thanked her, and reinforcing that idea that the agreement that's on the table now is the only way to guarantee an orderly, non-chaotic departure of the UK from the EU.
All right, Adam, thank you very much indeed. That's the latest reaction there from Brussels. Adam Fleming, our Europe correspondent, with that. As Europe and the whole of the United Kingdom digest the news that Theresa May is stepping down. She set out here in Downing Street earlier on this morning at the lectern a timetable for her departure, which means that she will resign as the leader of the Conservative Party on Friday, June the 7th. That will pave the way for a leadership contest within the Conservative Party. Many people already talking about the possible runners and riders in that contest. But the Prime Minister was emotional as she talked about the great honour it had been to serve her country, the country she loves, as Prime Minister. She was close to tears at the very end of her statement. Well, you've been watching special coverage of that Prime Ministerial announcement from here in Downing Street. We'll leave viewers on BBC World right now. You're watching BBC News. Right, we're going to pause from all the dramatic political developments now and take a look at the latest weather forecast. Simon King.
Hello there, good morning. We're going to see some slight changes in the weather as we go through the bank holiday weekend. For this morning, it's largely dry and sunny. You can see the bright lights of the UK on the satellite imagery there, but out towards the Atlantic, this massive cloud here, that's a weather system that's going to gradually move its way in. For today, a bit more cloud across Scotland and Northern Ireland, and generally more cloud in western areas of England and Wales. There could even be a few showers down towards South Wales, the South West Midlands and the West Country. Further east, though, staying dry with some sunshine, and still quite warm across eastern and southeastern areas. Temperatures up to 22 degrees. But in the far north of Scotland, still a little bit on the cool side at 11 or 12 degrees. Now, through tonight, we'll lose those showers across the south. And then for most of us, it's dry, varying amounts of cloud. This finger of rain starting to push its way into Northern Ireland. But quite a mild night, really. Temperatures no lower than about 7 to 12 degrees. So into the weekend then, that long weekend, there will be some sunshine. Rain, mainly in the north and west, especially on Sunday. And it'll turn cooler into bank holiday Monday. So this is Saturday. Dry to start off with, plenty of sunny spells, I think, but then the cloud will increase across Scotland and Northern Ireland, and with that, eventually rain starts to move its way in here. That'll gradually spread its way eventually into the far northwest of England too. A few showers down to the southeast of England, those could be on the heavy side, but generally speaking for England and Wales, it's dry with some sunny spells. Even though the cloud increases, those temperatures still getting up into the low 20s. But that weather system will continue to move its way southeastward into Sunday. So it's going to give some quite heavy rain across northern and western areas throughout the day. And that rain will gradually spread into the southeast. But as it does so, it will break up into more showery rain. There will be some sunshine around there on Sunday, especially as that rain clears away from northern England, Wales and across Northern Ireland. And maximum temperatures still up into the low 20s across the southeast, but chillier again in northern Scotland, 10 or 11 degrees here. This is Bank Holiday Monday then. We're looking at a mixture of some bright, some sunny spells and scattered showers moving through. Many places probably staying dry throughout much of the day on Bank Holiday Monday, but it will be a bit chillier. Temperatures only about 9 Celsius in Aberdeen, and in London those temperatures go from the low 20s into the high teens. That's all from me. Bye-bye.
The bank holiday is upon us again. Across the UK, plans are coming together for the long weekend, so whether you're cramming the family into a car, a boat or a tent, or planning a stroll out and about, you'll want to stay informed about any surprises that nature has in store. The weather from BBC News. We've got you covered.
Your votes have been cast in the European elections, so join us on Sunday night as the counting begins right across the EU. The results are expected to come in pretty quickly, and we will be bringing you all the analysis and the political reaction. The EU elections 2019, Sunday night from 10 on the BBC News channel.
You're watching a BBC News special with me, Ben Brown, live in Downing Street, where Theresa May has announced she will quit as Conservative leader on the 7th of June. Our headlines. In an emotional statement, Mrs May said she had done her best to honour the result of the EU referendum and that it was a matter of deep regret that she has been unable to deliver Brexit.
I do so with no ill will, but with enormous and enduring gratitude to have had the opportunity to serve the country I love.
Well, her emotional departure paves the way for a contest to decide a new party leader and new Prime Minister who will take on the job of trying to deliver Brexit. Boris Johnson, Andrea Leadsom, Esther McVeigh and Rory Stewart have all already confirmed that they will run in that contest, but dozens of other ministers are thought to be considering their options too.
Coming up in 15 minutes on Politics Live, we'll have the latest reaction from our panel on Theresa May's departure and hear from senior Conservatives about that impending leadership contest. What does it mean for the party and the country?
Hello from Downing Street, where an emotional Theresa May has announced that she will step down as the Conservative Party leader on Friday the 7th of June. In a statement here outside number 10, she said she would stay on as Prime Minister until a replacement had been found. Mrs May said she had reached the decision after realising she could not get her Brexit deal through Parliament.
Back in 2016, we gave the British people a choice. Against all predictions, the British people voted to leave the European Union. I feel as certain today as I did 3 years ago that in a democracy, if you give people a choice, you have a duty to implement what they decide. I have done my best to do that. I negotiated the terms of our exit and a new relationship with our closest neighbours that protects jobs, our security and our union. I have done everything I can to convince MPs to back that deal. Sadly, I have not been able to do so. I tried 3 times. I believe it was right to persevere, even when the odds against success seemed high. But it is now clear to me that it is in the best interests of the country for a new Prime Minister to lead that effort. So I am today announcing that I will resign as leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party on Friday the 7th of June, so that a successor can be chosen. I've agreed with the party chairman and with the chairman of the 1922 committee that the process for electing a new leader should begin in the following week. I have kept Her Majesty the Queen fully informed of my intentions, and I will continue to serve as her Prime Minister until the process has concluded. It is, and will always remain, a matter of deep regret to me that I have not been able to deliver Brexit. It will be for my successor to seek a way forward that honours the result of the referendum. To succeed, he or she will have to find consensus in Parliament where I have not. Such a consensus can only be reached if those on all sides of the debate are willing to compromise.
So that was the Prime Minister a little earlier, and as she reached the very end of her statement here in Downing Street, Mrs May was close to tears, saying that the job had been an honour to hold.
I will shortly leave the job that it has been the honour of my life to hold. The second female Prime Minister, but certainly not the last. I do so with no ill will, but with enormous and enduring gratitude to have had the opportunity to serve the country I love.
Well, I'm joined now by our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, who's with me now. And it was quite an extraordinary moment. The Prime Minister just a few yards from where we are now, with that statement outlining the timetable for her departure after so much pressure. And as we saw there, the very final seconds, essentially breaking down, really, and very close to tears.
Striking, because Mrs May has never been, one of these politicians who has, tells you how she feels. She's always been quite buttoned up, restrained. And I think that gave us a sense of maybe the personal sense of failure. Her mission was to deliver Brexit. It has ended in failure. Also, I think she is a politician who's always prided herself on a sense of public duty. And, there is just the harsh truth that she has been rejected, albeit by her party and by her cabinet, but she has been rejected, and that is difficult to take. So, for the first time, I think, ever, we saw her close to tears, at least in public. As for the timetable, well, we now know it's pretty much as we thought. So she will stand down on June the 7th. The nominations will close in the week beginning June 10, and then we will have about 3 weeks of hustings in Parliament for all the different candidates. And I mean, there are a huge number of potential people who seem to be putting their name forward. I've counted up to 15. You're going to have to whittle them all down. Until you're just left with 2. So they've allowed themselves about 2 to 3 weeks to do that. Then there will be about a month of campaigning, hustings in the country. There'll be hustings in all 11 regions. And then there'll be a secret ballot with the hope that a new party leader and prime minister will be in place by the end of July. Now, what that means is that that's good for some people, not so good for other people. It's good for the established front runners, and I would suggest for the Brexiteers, because they're up in the running, and in a short, sharp contest dominated by Brexit, that puts them in pole position. In a longer contest, then other issues begin to come into play, and people think, well, maybe we need something more than Brexit. There is also, frankly, more opportunity for the likes of Boris Johnson to trip and tumble. So the fact they're envisaging a short contest, I would say, further helps Boris Johnson, but I guess the calculation among party chiefs is they really do not want this to drag out forever and a day. They want a new leader in place by the summer to give him or her time to try and establish themselves, get a new team in place for the party conference in October.
Yeah, and well, if that's right, and we have a new Prime Minister, say the end of July, that only leaves, August, September, October, to work a way out of the European Union. And are we going to? Is all of this leading to a heightened possibility, even probability, of a no-deal Brexit?
I think it absolutely is, because not only does Westminster largely go to sleep in the summer, Brussels certainly goes to sleep in the summer. So the idea you're going to be able to restart negotiations before we hit the buffers of that October the 31st deadline, I would say, looks remote. Never mind whether you can actually come up with some sort of compromise that is going to magically bring everyone together, given that the parliamentary arithmetic is not going to have changed one jot. So that does markedly increase the likelihood that the new leader is going to be on tram lines heading towards no deal, which it will be incredibly difficult to get off. The only easy way off it is, as I say, to go cap in hand to Brussels and say, look, I'm the new leader, need a bit of time, let's not rush this, how about a few more months? I mean, most people you speak to here say Brussels are fed up, they're not willing to give us more time. I think maybe if it was a little bit longer, we had a new leader, there was a chance of a deal, perhaps they'd give us a bit more breathing space.
Assuming it's a leader who wants a deal. But anyway, Norman, thank you very much indeed. Norman Smith, our assistant political editor. And we've just been getting loads of reaction from prominent Conservative MPs, some of Theresa May's cabinet, former cabinet as well, on Twitter. Possible leadership contender, Environment Secretary Michael Gove, who's been pretty loyal, it has to be said, to the Prime Minister throughout. A moving speech from a Prime Minister who deserves our respect and gratitude. Thank you, Theresa May. The former Brexit Secretary, also expected to be a contender in the race for the leadership, Dominic Raab, said she was dignified as ever. Theresa May showed her integrity. She remains a dedicated public servant, patriot and loyal Conservative. So there we are, just a flavour of the Twitter reaction. Also the International Trade Secretary, Liam Fox, saying that the Prime Minister had, quote, acted with dignity and honour in pursuit of what she believes to be in the national interest, the hallmark of her time in public life. Lots of people really saying that she had acted with great honour and dignity. That has been a constant refrain. And responding to the Prime Minister's tears at the end of that statement that we just were watching, Heidi Allen, who you'll remember quit the party to become an MP with Change UK. She talked about why didn't we see that emotion more? Things could have been so different. So there's a flavour of the Twitter reaction. We can go now to get the thoughts of Rachel Sylvester of the Times. What is your overriding thoughts now that the Prime Minister has finally succumbed to all that overwhelming pressure to step down?
Well, obviously on today there's a human reaction of her tears, her emotion. It's a very sad moment for her, and there's a sense of compassion about that. But also I think the problem is, looking back, she made so many both political and personal errors. So right at the beginning, the language she used today of compromise and consensus, that wasn't there until very recently. She started off all guns blazing with very tough red lines in the negotiations with the EU. She talked about citizens of the world as citizens of nowhere. She, if anything, the real biggest flaw, I think, in her premiership was that she increased the divisions that are in the country rather than trying to heal them. And the really big challenge for the next leader, whoever it is to try and overcome the divisions and bring the country back together.
But when she tried to go for compromise, when she brought in the Labour Party for all those talks, she got nowhere.
That was too late, too little too late. You know, if she'd gone to the Labour Party right at the beginning, maybe it would have got nowhere, but it would have stood a better chance. I was talking to one of the people who was involved in those negotiations who said when she announced those talks, they hadn't even been consulted or talked to about what were the potential terms, what areas for compromise would be available. And in the end, she didn't compromise or budge herself on the customs union. So I think she wanted to talk about that at the end, but by then she'd sort of used up all her political capital, and each side had become entrenched in their different camps. So the Brexiteers had ended up in a position of wanting only no deal, and the previous Remainers were going increasingly towards a second referendum. And she herself, by using the language of no deal is better than a bad deal, had put out there the sense that any compromise was betrayal.
Rachel Sylvester, thank you so much. Let's go to Westminster and talk to the Conservative MP Robert Halfon, who joins us. What are your thoughts now that the Prime Minister has finally gone?
Well, first of all, I want to put it on the record my gratitude to the Prime Minister. She cut the cost of living in terms of tax cuts for lower earners, raising the national living wage. She created millions of jobs. She cut our deficit. And she did a lot of good things for our country that we should thank her. And she's a public servant devoted to duty. She's protected our NHS with an extra £20 billion going towards it, which will be welcomed by millions of people across the country.
Do you think she's been shabbily treated by some elements of her party?
Well, I think it's a very difficult situation since we lost the 2017 election. Although we had the highest popular vote, there was no majority in Parliament. Brexit has been impossible to deliver, and we haven't been able to unite the party or the country on it. And I think it was inevitable, but she did a lot of good things as well. And as I say, she's devoted to public service and devoted to duty. She's a good woman. I think we saw that on the steps of Downing Street. And most importantly, she has said time and time again that our party must be the party of social justice. It should be the party that addresses burning social injustice and helps those who are struggling or just about managing. And that is vital for whoever becomes the new Conservative leader.
Robert Halfon, thank you very much indeed for being with us here on BBC News. Well, it has been a momentous, historic day really here in Downing Street. Theresa May announcing that she will step down on Friday, June the 7th as leader of the Conservative Party. There'll be a new Prime Minister here in Downing Street, probably by the end of July. Now, Politics Live.